Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. There you go. Thanks for coming here today. I just want to introduce myself first. My name is Lou Jessica, and myself and a number of dedicated men and women publish and produce the Independent Gazette. I'm also on the radio. I've been 94.3 FM Talk Saturday morning Saturday Church. We're into our 4th year, so who would have ever thought that? Is this coming out right now?
No.
Can you hear me this way better? That's the way we'll go then. But certainly this is not about me. This is about you. You individuals that have come here today, that have taken the time to search for the truth. Certainly there's a lot of questions that have went on with 9/11, and this is what this is all about today. The presentation that has been being brought to you by the Newfoundland Church and the project of the church, the Freedom Society. And later on we're going to talk a little bit more about the Pennsylvania Leadership Forum. And that's something that I think you'll all find of interest, and something that is very important as we move forward, and the ability to bring people like Richard Gage to these forums and to educate not only ourselves, but also the media, which is so important. Richard had asked me to do this, and a couple of questions. How many folks here, if you don't mind raising your hands, because Richard needs to get some information, had heard about this event either through the email from 9/11 Truth email? How about through advertising, maybe through the newspaper? How about from the website? A few folks, okay. Personal invitations? There you go. There you go, Richard. That's where looks like personal invitations and just word of mouth. So we have there's a lot going on today. There's going to be a long presentation, and the church, and through the Sanctuary Church. How many folks are here through the church themselves? Richard has a long presentation today, and the more time we give him afterwards to ask questions, because I know a lot of us here do want to ask those questions. We have our own questions, and that's good. So we're going to move right along here. And the radio. Hey, 94.3 FM the talk. Maybe Saturday check. There you go. Yeah. The Steve Corbin show? I didn't ask that question. No, I did for Richard Gage. How about Saturday check? Anybody here from Saturday check? There we go. All right. So let's start right off. We're going to have an invitation by Pastor Sean Moon from the Sanctuary Church in Newfoundland.
Father, we thank you for this day that you have blessed. Father, we thank you for our speaker who has come here. Father, we ask that you would put a hedge of protection around him in the work that he is doing as David faces Goliath. And as he asks questions, which the American people and people in free countries all over the world are free to do. Father, we ask that this time would be well spent, that we would be educated, that we could see new sides and contemplate new things, and that they will lead to the truth, because the truth will set us free. We thank you. We give you all the honor, glory, and praise. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Hello. Sounds better. Our next part of the event is the Pledge of Allegiance. We originally, or I was originally asked to get somebody in the military to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and I think it's only appropriate that that happens. Educate as many folks as possible With that, saying that, I'd like to introduce Anthony Antonello, and he will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, guys. I'd like to say something. I pledged allegiance. I was 7, 8 years trying to get truth out, and I remember 7, 8 years ago in the streets of New York, I mean, there were literal fights, and I would come back to this area, I would try to call radio stations, nobody would listen whatsoever, and to come this far, that we're actually having an event, have Richard Gage here from Architects and Engineers, other activists, you know, here, Lou, everybody who's doing this. We've come a very long way, and you know, I think that's a great thing. We have to keep fighting. It's obvious that, you know, people want to censor us. They don't want the truth. It's hard to handle, but we got to keep doing what we're doing. And thank you, everybody, for being here.
I would like to go back. I'd like to introduce Kala Ann Schaefer, and she's going to sing the national anthem for us.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early?
Kayla, that was beautiful. A lot better now? Okay, good. Governments throughout history have a long record of not telling its citizens the full truth. We don't need to look much farther than the Gulf of Tonkin, or there's no such thing as the Mafia or Operation Mockingbird. 9/11, and since 9/11, we've had numerous wars. Millions of Afghanis and Iraqis have died. Over 6,000 military personnel have been killed. Tens of thousands of military have been maimed and families ruined. And we've had a continuous war on terror with no end in sight. So with that all being said, you would think that not only we, the people, but also the media would want to dig into this as much as possible. Certainly, one of the things that we can question is what has happened to the 28 pages of the 9/11 report that's still redacted. If we're using that report solely as our information of what has happened in 9/11 and what it has wrought on so many families and in our lives, you would think that you know, media and us would want to search a little bit further. Why was the collapse of building number 7 not part of that report? So I think these are the important things that we need to be asking, and certainly Richard Gage is going to address these issues. But certainly, let's not attack the messenger. Let's look at the message. Certainly, when you look at the way the media has not only reported on this, but of course those that even question what went on, very often you're attacked. And I'll go back to that again. Let's not attack the messenger, but let's really look into what that message is. We're proud today to host the Scranton presentation of the 9/11 Blueprint for Truth, and to introduce our speaker. Today is the second stop of a 3-event Pennsylvania weekend tour of the Architects and Engineers 9/11 Truth. Tomorrow, Richard Gage will be at the Sanctuary Church. And what time does that start tomorrow, Sean? At 2 o'clock. And our speaker, as I said, is Richard Gage, who has been an architect for 28 years in the San Francisco Bay Area,
and is a member of the prestigious American Institute of Architects. He is a professional willing to place his credibility and reputation on the line, and one who has endured personal sacrifice. Mr. Gage is a tireless and tenacious advocate for questions that are all too few are willing to ask, and truths that fewer still are willing to face. Truths that may shape the foundations of our worldview. His deep concern about the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center high-rise buildings on 9/11 and his concern about the state of our country began after hearing the startling conclusions of a reluctant 9/11 researcher, David Ray Griffin. Dr. Griffin was interviewed that eye-opening day in May of 2006 on the Guns and Butter radio program by Bonnie Faulkner in Berkeley, California. This changed the speaker's life radically and launched his own unyielding quest for the truth about 9/11, inspiring him to found the organization Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Architects and Engineers 9/11 Truth now numbers over 2,300 architects and engineers and 20,000 others, all demanding a new investigation into these catastrophic structural failures. Why wouldn't we want a new investigation? That's one of the questions I will have a little later on today. It would seem logical that as new evidence comes forward, we would not only ask but demand a new investigation. Mr. Gage has been interviewed on radio and TV on over 400 stations and has presented the World Trade Center evidence in more than 80 American cities and 32 foreign countries to packed audiences of 100 to 3,000 people whose worldview has been irrevocably altered by the myth-shattering information. I'm certain that today's presentation will uphold this remarkable tradition. I consider him to be a beacon of truth and a patriot, and it's great getting to know you even more so, Mr. Gage. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Gage.
There, we're getting there. Thank you. Awesome. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We have a lot to talk about today, and it's my delight, great delight, to be here in Scranton for the first time in my whole life. Some of you have spent your whole life here, and I'm just a first-timer. Oops. There we go. It's my deep honor to address the people of Scranton on the subject of 9/11 today. This is the second on our third stop, as Lou mentioned. I want to start off by thanking you for your willingness to come and to look at the evidence. This is not easy. In fact, architecture and engineering projects are sometimes quite joyful, sometimes very, very difficult. This particular one has proven to be one of the most difficult projects of my life. Not difficult in terms of reaching conclusions, as you'll see, but difficult in terms of the implications of those conclusions. And finding people open-minded and willing enough, like yourselves, to come and to look at the facts. Because most people will not. We're going to talk about that. So my commitment to you is to speak the truth and to leave you with extremely valuable science-based evidence and facts that will help you winnow myth from reality, which is extremely important in today's world. But please check out the facts that you hear. We're not looking for believers. This is science that we're talking about. You know, doubts about the official investigation didn't begin with 9/11 Truth Movement. In fact, the 9/11 commissioners themselves raised the most serious doubts of all. They're mostly lawyers, politicians, not engineers. They say we were set up to fail by the Bush administration. That the 9/11 Commission report was not considered to be the last word on the attacks, but only a beginning. We were extremely frustrated with the false statements that we were getting. This investigation is now compromised, says Max Cleland before he resigned from the commission. America's being cheated. The White House wants to cover it up. What is this all about? And the senior counsel for the 9/11 Commission himself says, I was shocked at how different the truth was from the way it was described. There was an agreement not to tell the people the truth about 9/11. What government and military officials told Congress, the Commission, the media, and the public about who knew what and when was almost entirely and inexplicably untrue. The lawyer for the 9/11 Commission. That's reason enough to cause and force a reinvestigation of 9/11, let alone all the evidence that the 9/11 Truth Movement has put together over the years, and that we're going to be looking at a small slice of tonight. It's extremely important, therefore, that we find out why, what happened really. Well, again, as Lou mentioned, we've got 2 invasions in which 2 million people have been killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. A $4.5 trillion global war on terror, the loss of our civil liberties, the First and Fourth Amendment rights, where any of us today can be arrested, held indefinitely, not told what we're charged with, no right to a lawyer or a trial by jury. In America, today, Americans, not in Yemen or someplace, but we can be tortured and assassinated as well. That is legal today. And America is allowing that to happen. The mainstream media is not covering it. A host of other issues, of course, that we're all suffering from, and we'll suffer probably a lot more from. If the truth about 9/11 is swept under the rug of history. Only the truth about 9/11 will stop another 9/11 type attack from happening again. We need to dedicate ourselves to finding out exactly what happened and why. So these are among the many reasons that we must peer back into this painful part of our recent history and re-examine the relatively new physical evidence that we've not seen in the mainstream media. Speaking of which, Time magazine, even in 2006, reports up to 36% of Americans want a new investigation. They thought maybe America carried out the attacks themselves. Time magazine reports it's not a fringe phenomenon, but a mainstream political reality. That's back in 2006. Well, in 2007, Scripps Howard did a poll, found 16% of Americans believe that the World Trade Center towers were brought down not by jet plane impacts and fire, but by explosive demolition. We're going to find out in this room today, before we start, where we are individually on this issue. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Before I do, I'm going to try to figure out what the clicking is all about.
Any questions so far? David Medeiros going to be here on Wednesday?
Yep, I heard he's coming.
Not yet.
What was the question?
I just wanted to know if David Madeira was coming.
I can't hear you.
Madeira.
David Madeira, is he here?
Hi, Richard.
Hi, David. We had a great interview. Thank you for your courage. David, that was an awesome show of fair and balanced reporting. Sorely missed in the mainstream media. Thank you very, very much. Yes? Stay with me. We're getting there. So, so I'll ask you 3 questions real quick here. The first question is, how many of us believe the official story? How many of us are unsure of what happened about the Twin Towers destruction? And how many of us may already have come into the room agreeing with the evidence? First, the official story. which tells us that the jet planes hit the towers, large explosion of jet fuel. Are you trying to get my attention, Tim? Closer? Here? Yeah, go ahead and turn it down. I'll hold it closer. Sorry. Jet planes hit the towers, large explosion of jet fuel.
I'm having a hard time understanding you.
You can't understand me.
You're fading in and out.
Fading in and out.
Yes, that's something wrong with you.
So I'm going to continue. And so she's working on the other mic. And then structural failure due to weakening from the heat. That's the official story. No reason to believe otherwise. This is what we have been told for 13 years.
And we need microphone on this one.
Testing, 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 testing. Thank you. So, no reason to believe otherwise. This is the official story. How many of us came into the room today pretty much believing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? How many of us are unsure? You've heard a few things. You're here to check out this controversy. Go like this. I'm not going to actually count you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 34, 35, 36, 37, 37. How many of us already agree that these towers were blown up? It's clear to me. Oh my gosh. Why didn't you guys bring your friends? You don't have any friends. They won't talk to you anymore. Oh my God. Well, I'm going to give you some tools to help with that little problem. I have a similar issue, but we have a lot of powerful tools for you. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, said, we found no evidence of explosives. So they later acknowledged in writing that they never looked for it. How can you find what you're not looking for or won't look for? Well, thousands of scientists, architects, engineers, others have looked for it, and guess what? It was not hard to find. You're going to see about it today. We've been speaking about it for years now in 80 American cities, 32 foreign countries. 2,300 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation. Are there any architects here tonight? 1. Any engineers? They always outnumber us. Watch this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Great. Any firefighters? Awesome. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Great to have you guys here. Any normal people? All right. Great. Now we know who we're talking to mostly. The architects and engineers get this right away. I want you to know I have a background. I've been working as an architect for 28 years now, and I've been employed with several San Francisco Bay Area architecture firms. I'm now devoting 100% of my time to this effort, and you're going to see why tonight as we get into the implications of the evidence we're looking at. Like many other architects and engineers, I've designed several fireproof steel frame buildings like these $10 million and $3 million and $10 million gymnasiums, and the construction administration for this $120 million high school in the Bay Area. And more recently, this $400 million mixed-use project with retail, parking structure, and fireproof steel frame mid-rise office space, which all has together over 1,200 square feet, 1,200 tons of steel framing. So I haven't designed or worked on high-rises, but a lot of other steel projects, steel frame projects. This is our website at ae911truth.org. We're going to fly through this information today. You can go back and pick up more evidence, more questions answered, more videos, etc. on your own. And hopefully all of you have gotten a brochure as you came in. If you did not, would you raise your hand like this? Okay, and we'll bring you one. There are helpers at the back. If you hold your hand up high, they will put a brochure in it. If you don't, they won't. Let's get on the same page, find out what happened that morning as we get started here. Uh-oh, we don't have sound on our video. We had sound on our video. Louder? I can almost hear it. Louder? Louder? then we'll start over.
On September 11, we learned that 4 passenger planes were hijacked and taken radically off course. Within an hour, 2 of the planes had flown into the enormous steel towers of the World Trade Center, creating fires and eventually toppling them. Dazed by the news, the American public soon believed the fires in the towers had burned so hot they caused the steel frames of the buildings to give way. A myth developed, fed by official sources through the media to a bewildered audience. Elements of the myth. The impact of the airplanes, gallons of burning jet fuel, steel melting, the buildings failing and suddenly imploding. In a mere 10 seconds, 110 stories hurtled earthward, pulverizing into dust. Right from the start, on the street itself, the official story was born.
Come out of nowhere and just scream right into the side of the Twin Tower, exploding through the other side. And then I witnessed both towers collapse, one first and then the second, mostly due to structural failure because the fire was just too intense.
The myth bled into the FEMA report and was echoed by the experts.
It was the combination of the impact load doing great damage to the building, followed by the fire, that caused collapse.
So there's the official story pretty much
In a nutshell, right there. Actually from the guy on the street, who the first one interviewed, mostly due to structural failure because the fire was just too intense. Who talks like that? I witnessed. We're going to set that aside for a moment and move on and try to find out what the actual evidence is. The way we do that is to look with the scientific method. The scientific method's been around for 100 years or more. We formulate a question. How do the towers come down? What caused them? We do background research and we make observations. We construct a hypothesis, our best guess. I think they came down by fire. No? Maybe they came down by controlled demolition. We put all the hypotheses in order and we examine each objectively. And then we come up with experiments to test those hypotheses against the data. We analyze the results and draw conclusions. We hope that our hypotheses, some of them, are corroborated by the data. When that happens, we go eureka. We report the results in an open, transparent manner. We're going to be testing NIST on how they did with each step of the scientific method. One of the things we're going to find out is that they will not even report what the computer input data is for their models for the destruction of these 3 towers. They say, we can't give that information to you. It could jeopardize public safety. That's a quote. How can it jeopardize public safety withholding information from the architects and engineers who were responsible for ensuring the public safety with that information? How these high-rises came down due to fire. Well, if the hypothesis is not corroborated, we go back and we construct a new hypothesis or find one that is corroborated by the data. With this in mind, we're going to apply the scientific method and just take a quick look. What are the forces that historically have destroyed buildings? Let's take a look. Here's fire. Fire is certainly one. It's an organic process. It moves through the building every 20 minutes or so, burning out one area. That's all the fuel there is, so it moves on looking for fresh new fuel sources. So when a wood frame building, which is more likely to collapse due to fire, when it collapses, it'll fall over. It won't go straight down to the path of greatest resistance, the intact structural portions below. That's very helpful. If we could turn off the front incandescents as well. Yes, let's get those off. Really appreciate that. So let's see what fires do in steel frame buildings. We do need the chandeliers a little bit way up so people can see their notes. And don't turn the sound on and off on me. We'll leave the sound on for the videos, because I got 30 of them. So we need to have that sound working for the videos right now.
To see what would happen to the heavy
Okay, leave that up. Good. I'll start the video again.
The way in which steel-framed buildings behave in fires depends on their construction. In this test, done by British Steel in 1995, a large amount of typical office furniture was burned to see what would happen to the heavy steel beams that supported the ceiling.
When steel is bare, when it heats up, it gets weaker. It's not that it melts in a fire. In fact, normal fires are not hot enough to melt steel. Even if you were, for example, to use an unusual fuel like kerosene, you cannot achieve temperatures hot enough to melt steel. But what happens is it starts to lose its strength. And as it loses its strength, it starts to sag. It becomes softer and sags and can no longer support the load.
This was the largest test of its kind ever conducted. It showed how unprotected steel can be distorted even by a normal office fire. But as is typical in steel buildings, the structural beams only slowly and progressively warped and sagged. There was no chance of a sudden collapse.
In over 20 years, I have not seen, until recently, a protected steel structure that has collapsed in a fire.
Until recently. Let's leave my microphone on too. He's referring to 9/11, when not one, not two, but 3 steel frame high-rises collapsed. So this is important information, is it not? There's no chance of a collapse. There's a slow, progressive warping when these steel frame buildings are subjected to very, very hot temperatures. So let's put that on the shelf and proceed and see what other evidence there is, such as previous high-rise fires that have happened, like this one in Los Angeles, burned 3.5 hours over 5 floors. In Philadelphia, 18 hours over 8 floors, the Meridian building. Some of you will remember that, 1991. In Caracas, Venezuela, 17 hours over 26 floors. Not one of these collapsed. Okay, but here's some buildings that did collapse due to natural causes. Earthquake. They fell over in this case. And you see the remains of a building somewhat intact. It's mangled, certainly, but the concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. The structure, the steel structure, is not dismembered one from another, column from beam. So we'll set that aside and look at explosions, which can certainly destroy buildings as well. We have a thick, billowy cloud from the intense fires that are created, the chemical reactions creating incredible heat, causing a cauliflower unfolding shape with a thick edge, clearly defined edge. This is very important. These are explosions. This is not a normal fire. We have witnesses that hear sounds of explosions. They see flashes of light. If you have these features, you know you have explosion. Now, explosions can be harnessed very effectively to bring buildings down in controlled demolitions. So here's an example. We have 100 or more to look at. And so the way they do this is to put small cutter charges, usually with high energy explosives, in the columns and beams. They set them off synchronistically, usually, but not always, from the bottom up. And so the building falls at nearly free fall acceleration, and usually symmetrically, unless they want to have it fall asymmetrically. So there are some key characteristics of these explosive controlled demolitions, such as a sudden onset of destruction. usually at the base of the structure, a straight down symmetrical progression of the collapse into its own footprint, because demolition waves remove the column supports, resulting in a free fall acceleration, which is through the path of what was the greatest resistance, the thousands of tons of structural steel or concrete in the building. A total dismemberment of the steel structure so they can be loaded and shipped very easily. So it falls like a house of cards. Minimal damage to adjacent structures. Witnesses that hear sounds of explosions, see flashes of light. Enormous clouds of pulverized concrete, often. And squibs, or isolated explosive ejections, going off here and there, sometimes mistimed, but they're easily identifiable as explosions. And there's chemical evidence of cutter charges left behind in the residue. If you have all these, this is direct evidence of explosive destruction. The fire can't create any one of these, let alone all 10 of them. So if you have additional supporting evidence, such as government documentation, which we'll be looking at today, experts agree that that's a controlled demolition. At least those experts that don't have $100,000 contracts with the federal government that would be put in jeopardy were they to tell the truth about something such as 9/11. But those without, those who are unbiased, we expect that. Foreknowledge. These are planned months in advance. They require permits in most cases. People know about them. And video documentation. All this is, of course, proof of controlled demolition. So, with this model in mind, using the scientific method as we are, we want to take a look at this third skyscraper that collapsed on 9/11. Now, I didn't know about this until about 8 years ago, and I was shocked. The third worst structural failure in modern history. And yet, most architects and engineers still know nothing about it, and most Americans. And it's extremely important, as you'll see. How many of us in this room are relatively unfamiliar with World Trade Center 7? Wave your hands like this. I'm going to just do a quick count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 32. And so that's great, because I'm going to direct my comments right now to you. Very important that we understand this. Now, this is a 47-story skyscraper. The tallest building in most of our states, actually. But in New York, next to what was the highest building in the world at the time, it looks kind of dwarfed, but 47 stories. Not hit by an airplane like the Twin Towers, which is another reason we're talking about it. It collapsed on the afternoon of 9/11 at 5:20. Had a few small fires in it, presumably set off by debris that came from the World Trade Center towers when they went down that morning. So 7 hours later, this building goes down, and we're going to compare the features of a controlled demolition to this building's destruction. Beginning with, is there a sudden onset of destruction at the building? Let's listen to Dan Rather narrate the destruction of this building.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape of the collapse of this building. It's amazing. Amazing, incredible picture word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Well, Dan's using his intuition here, dynamite to knock it down. He's trying to understand what he's seeing. We should all do that. That's great. Problem is, he never repeated that ever again. In fact, the mainstream media has not shown us this building, with 3 exceptions, and Geraldo Rivera being one of them, and there's a couple of others. So we'll ask the question later, why isn't the mainstream media showing architects, engineers, the American public what is clearly a problem for the American people? If a building like this can go down and they blame normal office fires. We have thousands of skyscrapers around the world that are built in similar design. Is there a straight down symmetrical progression into its own footprint? Let's see. Pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. In fact, in the first half second, the penthouse falls, indicating the core columns underneath the entire penthouse are compromised, allowing it to fall first, a half a second earlier. A key feature of controlled demolition. But I'm not quite convinced yet. On the right we have Building 7. Excuse me, on the left we have Building 7. On the right we have a known controlled demolition, several of them. Is there any comparison, similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? Especially when it looks exactly like a controlled demolition. And especially since fire has never brought down a high-rise building. Ever. So, yeah, we think NIST should have examined the possibility, at least, of explosive demolition. No, they went straight for these fires. And these are the worst fires that we have photographic or video evidence of in these buildings, in this building. And at 2:30 on the 12th floor, that fire was burning, but it was blamed as the cause of the initiation of collapsing. But it was out over an hour before the building collapsed, so it couldn't have been responsible for the cause of the collapse. Here's the computer model that they use. Now, they only show us the first 2 seconds of the drop of this building. Why? It begins to tip over after 2 seconds. They can't control their own computer model they use to prove their theory that the building came down due to fire. There's 400 structural steel connections failing every second in that computer model. That's the only way they can get it to, try to get it to fall similarly to the way it actually fell. But if there was massive internal failure such as you see here, there would be massive damage and deformation to the exterior perimeter structure, the granite panels and the windows. We don't see that. There's a few windows probably, but it doesn't add up at all. How do we get a building to come straight down? We have to remove all 80 columns all at once in the building and on at least 8 floors. I'll tell you why in a minute. Can fire be responsible for this level of precision, being an organic, natural, chaotic process? No. Something else is responsible for the removal of those columns, especially when you consider that it fell at free fall acceleration. The building is gaining downward momentum with every second. And it fits the free fall curve exactly. What am I referring to? Let's look at free fall for just a minute. I'm going to drop this object. 3, 2, 1. That's free fall. Why? Because there was no resistance underneath the bottom. This building has 40,000 tons of structural steel resistance in it. 5 times stronger than it needed to be to hold this building up for its life and keep it from going anywhere, much less at free fall. So you see the problem. Architects, engineers, kindergartners can get this. This is not rocket science. No harm meant to the scientists in the room. It's as if 8 stories has been completely removed, because that's the distance over which the building actually fell at free fall, and the rest of it is right next to free fall, almost free fall, resulting in the total dismemberment of the steel structure. So not only did they get removed, they got dismembered, one column from another. A 47-story skyscraper reduced to about 4 or 5 stories, falling like a house of cards. In a moment-resisting steel frame building, many of these columns are welded very rigidly to the beams. We should have had, if it was going to have a failure at all, it should have been, I mean, it would have fallen over, yes, but we would have had massive portions of this building hanging together like they do in these natural collapses. Are there witnesses that hear sounds of explosions?
And the whole time you hear them thump, 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 thump. So, I think I know an explosion when I hear it.
And then it was like another 2-3 seconds. You heard explosions. Like, boom! It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when the compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was a boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing. When we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions.
What sort of sound?
Like a boom. Like an explosion.
And more than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run. What?
They even have information of bombs in the building. And not one of these reports, turn me down a little, appear in any of the official, these witness testimonies do not appear in any of the official reports. Nor does explosions that are going on throughout Ground Zero, like this one, the afternoon of 9/11.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, look. You want to call your mother or something?
Why not? Do we have chemical evidence of cutter charges? Well, we'll come back to that when we get to the Twin Towers. But for right now, these 8 characteristic features is direct evidence, or direct evidence of explosive destruction. And fire can't create any one of them, let alone all 8 of them. Speaking of which, if there was going to be a collapse at World Trade Center Ground Zero, we would expect it to be this one, World Trade Center 5, which was fully engulfed in flames. What happened to it? It didn't collapse. High-rise, mid-rise office skyscrapers do not collapse, nor does this one. 44 stories, the Mandarin Tower in China, fully engulfed, all 44 stories. Did it collapse? No, slightly toasted around the edges, but put back into service. That's true with most skyscrapers. But this one was brought down by these small, normal office fires, even according to the official story. Normal office fires in 6.5 this time. The best hypothesis has only a low probability of occurrence. What's your best hypothesis? Fire. Wow. Your best hypothesis has only a low probability of occurrence. What do we do when the hypothesis is not corroborated by the evidence? You go back and find another one. They didn't do that. They left that up to NIST. They say further research, investigation, and analysis are needed to resolve this issue. Unfortunately, though, for those hoping to resolve the issue, 99% of that evidence, the steel that would give engineers an idea of what happened to this building, was illegally carted to China for recycling starting within 2 weeks after 9/11. This is the illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene, prompting Bill Manning from Fire Engineering magazine to suggest that crucial evidence is on the slow boat to China, showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately. This is like the head guy, fire protection engineers. It wasn't. So we need an investigation into the destruction of the evidence, too. Well, what did the experts say? Well, here's one from Europe, the top European controlled demolition expert, Danny Jawenko. 27 years in the business, starts from below. They've simply blown away the columns. It's a controlled demolition. Team of experts did this. Professional work, without any doubt. Wow, that's pretty interesting. Do we have foreknowledge? Remember, these are planned months in advance. Let's listen to these mysterious construction workers walking away from Building 7, hearing an explosion, looking over their shoulder, and then looking straight into the CNN television camera and saying this.
Keep your eye on that building as we come down.
All right, guys? We are looking back. There's a building about to blow up. Hopefully, debris coming down.
The building's about to blow up? Flame into it. How do they know? Do fires blow up buildings? And this gentleman, who was a witness of explosions before, they had been moved back 6 blocks behind a line. And he's listening to a radio held in the hands of a Red Cross worker because they were concerned, they were being told that the building's coming down. And they were told that it was coming down because it had structural problems. Here's what he heard on the radio.
At the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1.
And then he hears all those explosions that he talked about earlier. Do fires bring buildings down to countdowns? Unlikely. Something else has happened. So we have, at 5 o'clock, 20 minutes before this building came down, here's the BBC announcing that it already came down. That's really good reporting. Jane Stanley on the job. They give the reason for it, due to structural weakening when the towers went down. They apologize for this grievous error, citing the confusing events of the day. That's a little bit of a stretch. Yeah, CNN does even better. Announced it at 10:45 that morning.
In New York, Alan Frank joins us on the phone in Lower Manhattan. Alan?
Alan, just 2 or 3 minutes ago, there was yet another collapse or explosion. I'm now out of sight. A Good Samaritan has taken me in on Duane Street. But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who rushed by estimated that 50 stories went down. The street filled with smoke. It was like a forest fire roaring down a canyon. Now, as I think Patty Sack and others have told you, all of Manhattan is covered, downtown Manhattan is covered with thick white ash and building material.
A 50-story building went down. There was no other 50-story building went down. There was no other building other than these 3 skyscrapers that went down. The Twin Towers had gone down 15 or more minutes earlier. Had this building come down at 10:45, we wouldn't even have seen it on video. It would have been completely obscured by the massive dust cloud produced when the Twin Towers went down. So many researchers suggest it was supposed to go down at that time, and that's how they got this story. Then they're waiting for it to come down all day. And then finally, these construction workers walking away from the building, most people think that we're fixing a dud, that it finally got it fixed and went down to 5:20 in front of God and everybody. Thank goodness, because we have a clue about what's going on now. So we believe that for Building 7, our use of the scientific method reveals that the hypothesis of controlled demolition is supported. That we have all the features that point to direct evidence. None of them point to fire, with additional corroborating evidence that that's proof of controlled demolition. If I could have, about Building 7, ask you those same 3 questions. How many of you, along with the official story, believe that Building 7 came down due to normal office fires? Anybody? Be brave. Nobody's going to fight you. You might be unsure. How many of you are still unsure? It happens. You know, I can't see your hands unless you go like this. Okay, 1, 2. Are you in? 3. Okay, great. Thank you, Kevin. How many do you think this building came down by controlled demolition? Okay, you have a problem. All right, we have a major problem. Why? Well, let's start with who's in this building. The CIA, the Secret Service, the IRS, the Department of Defense, Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which was on the floor with the greatest fires, which lost thousands of files it was actively using against hundreds of cases, such as cases against WorldCom, Enron. So we want those fires investigated now too, right? On the 12th floor. So is it reasonable to suggest or imply or assume that Al-Qaeda had access to this extremely high secure building to plant explosives through the columns and beams in it? Okay, unlikely. This is our first clue, or for some of us our 20th clue, as to why some people call this an inside operation. We certainly want an investigation of the security company, don't we? That had the contract for the security. Curiously enough, up to the date of 9/11. So we had a massive campaign the last 2 Septembers, and we want people to know that a third tower fell down. We asked them this question like we did you, and 37 of you said, no, I didn't know. Now that you know, I've got your attention, I think, because this was part of the conspiracy of 9/11. It's intimately tied. If there's a question about how this building came down, we have to go look at the Twin Towers. And we're going to do that. But first I want to invite you, having seen a taste of the problem we're up against, to be more informed, to be invited locally to screenings of 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, our DVD, which we're going to show you a quick piece of. But if you'll put your name and your phone number and your email, our local activists will find you and invite you. And we can add you onto our email list also, because we are giving the latest evidence that comes out, our best efforts towards securing a real investigation. My problem is that I don't have the pens. I forgot to put the pens on these. Can we borrow 2 of yours and you can collect more from me from the suitcase in the back? Great. Okay, that's one. You know what? I've got another one right here. And we're grateful to be here in Scranton today. And you had the opportunity, and I hope you're grateful, for seeing this information for free. So this is not a trick. This event is free. And I'm glad you're here. If you see the importance of our work and you want to help us, I encourage you to do exactly that. So to that end, we're going to pass around 2 black boxes, and you're encouraged to donate. You can write a check to AE 9/11 Truth. You can put $10 or $20 or $1, whatever you feel you're guided to do. Don't feel guilty. This is not about that. So there's one and there's the other. Thanks, Anthony. So this will help us to give stipends to our volunteers, to break through into the mainstream, but to get more vinyl banners, DVDs, brochures into the hands of the real heroes of the 9/11 Truth Movement. Those who are out there on the street helping people understand that we have a serious problem in America. And to that end, we created a DVD that we're very proud of called 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out. We put 43 technical experts in their fields in this DVD. How many of you have actually already seen it? Some of you. Great. The rest of you will be delighted to know we have it in the back available for you.
Speculate on that forever. What we really need to know is how those buildings came
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
To undermine scientific integrity is to undermine our democracy.
This is what NIST has done, denied and ignored crucial evidence.
The American people absolutely need the truth of 9/11.
More than 1,500 architects and engineers and 12,000 others, including many scientists, have signed the petition calling for a scientific investigation of the destruction of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7. The report, issued by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, referred to as NIST, was not valid science.
They're talking about a single columnar collapse or failure that resulted in a total collapse of the building.
Building number 7 descended in free fall for the first 100 feet.
Into the Trade Center towers, because here's where the rubber meets the road. Here's where most Americans are traumatized by the events of that day, and they think they know how those towers came down. And they'll give you any number of stories, because there were a number of official stories before they landed on the final one, which confuses a lot of people. But the Twin Towers themselves were an engineering marvel. We'll come to that. Whether some people hated the design, like Robert Stern, who calls it gigantic dumbness, famous architect, or somebody else who believes that the simple sculptural purity of the building's forms. But essentially what they did is take two squares and extrude them vertically until they became the highest buildings in the world. Compare that to the beautiful unfolding massing of the Art Deco design Empire State Building, which was at the time the tallest building of the world before these. So what's important for you to understand, though, is that the engineering achievement here is extraordinary. Before, you had a forest of columns through the building, every 20 or 30 feet in these high-rise buildings. But what they did here is group those columns in the middle and then had an exoskeleton, a very severe structural system of columns around the outside, allowing 60 feet, like all the way across this building, of open space to have offices, which gave you this kind, for the first time in history, of open office planning. Really fantastic. Achieved by massive core columns, 47 of them, 52 inches by 22 inches, almost solid steel at the bottom, and then thinning at mid-height to about 2 inches thick and slightly smaller. And then at the very top, the lightest part of these columns are only 3/8 inch thick wide flange columns. So it's like a pyramid, if you will, structurally. Lightest part is the tallest part is very, very light at the top. And surrounded by an incredibly dense perimeter structural system, through which any collapse would have had to crush all 230 columns around the outside of the building, and those 47 massive columns inside. So keep that in mind. You have a sense of what this structure is here. It's 100,000 tons of steel, a heat sink that would draw any heat, 1,800 degrees, as NIST claimed, away from its source, conducting it safely through the rest of the structural system, so that no single part of the building in most skyscrapers ever gets to its failure point of its half strength, which is at about 1,200 degrees, which the fires didn't even get to in the World Trade Center towers, despite claims otherwise. Okay, we had flight 11 hitting the North Tower at 8:46 in the morning, about 15 stories down. And then about 15 minutes later, the South Tower was hit about 30 stories down. And it suffered its collapse about 45 minutes later, and then the North Tower came down. Now, here's the official story. Massive fires, which the videos and photos betray, causing the floor to sag because the fireproofing was knocked off by the airplane. Now, even if the fires were there and the floor did sag, it wouldn't pull in the perimeter columns because there's no additional load to do that. So what does NIST do in their computer models to cause this building to fail? They impose an artificial load at this point of 5,000 pounds on every column all the way around the building, forcing it to fail in their computer model because actually they saw it fall and they knew it fell by fire. So this is how they got their computer model to fail. This is fraud, pure, utter fraud on the American people. And they stopped their entire analysis at the initiation of collapse. There was no analysis of the ability of the intact cold hard steel below, which you just saw a great example of the last slide, to resist that collapse. No analysis whatsoever. It's 10,000 pages of obfuscation and distraction. The NIST report. It took them 3 years and $20 million of your money. But we're not going to be looking at that today because we're going to focus on the evidence for controlled demolition. We're going to be looking for a sudden onset of destruction where, not at the base of the structure like Building 7, but at the point of jet plane impact. Why? Because this is a giant magic show. Our attention is drawn to the big flames from the jet fuel. And imagining that, how terrible that was, even though jet fuel burns only 600 degrees in open office air, according to the manufacturer. Even though the official story even admits that 90% of it was burned up outside the building. And even though they acknowledge also that the rest of it was burned up in 10 minutes. That we're talking about normal office fires and damage to the columns by flames. So, something else is going on besides that initial illusion. We're talking about explosions, which witnesses hear, and flashes of light which they see, such as occur in the oral histories produced by Thomas von Essen, where 118 people in these oral histories starting October 2001, 118 of them are talking about sounds of explosions and flashes of light. But we didn't know about this until August of 2005. Why? Because the city of New York was keeping it from the American people, and the New York Court State of Appeals forced them to release this. What do we find in these reports, these oral histories? Shook my bones shortly before the first tower came down. I remember feeling the ground shaking. I heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. One floor under another. Figured it was a bomb because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. These are firefighters giving this information. Let's compare. Here's the North Tower on the right, a known controlled demolition on the left. For the first 4 seconds of this destruction of these buildings, is there any similarity that you see? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? Sudden onset of destruction, bands of explosions, which we'll get to in a moment. It seemed like on television when they blow up these buildings, it seemed like it was going all the way around like a belt. All these explosions. Somewhere around the middle of the World Trade Center, there was this orange and red flash coming up. Flash just kept popping all the way around the building, and the building had started to explode. Like here, where we have the South Tower on the right, a known controlled demolition on the left. Again, any similarity? Why wouldn't they? At least examine the hypothesis of explosive demolition here. Thought the terrorists planted explosives somewhere in the building. That's how loud it was. Crackling, explosive.
You started floor by floor instead of popping out. If it had plan to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom. All the way down.
Are they credible? I think so.
Then we crack it up at the top to get it started. We go every other floor all the way down. Every explosive has a timer on it. That's why it's controlled. When the columns go, each floor goes down and impacts the one below and keeps going.
Mark Loiseau is president of a company called Controlled Demolition.
You don't have to go to the top floor. You can go almost anywhere in the structure, and given the right circumstances, you can release all of that stored energy, converting it into what is called kinetic energy. That's energy in motion, and that's what brings the building down.
So top-down controlled demolitions. NIST says it couldn't be a top-down controlled demolition because it didn't start at the bottom. Well, they said it couldn't be a controlled demolition because it didn't start at the bottom. You turn me down just a hair. NIST says the upper part of it, above the point of jet plane impacts, this upper part drove the rest of the building down because it was just too overwhelming of a mass. Let's test that theory. Let's run a Mack truck into a Volkswagen. Knowing what we know about Newton's third law of motion, who's going to win? Why? Massive structure. Does it matter if we drop the Volkswagen on the Mack truck? No. The lighter part of a structure cannot possibly destroy the heavier, intact, cold hard steel below. It's never going to happen. What is happening in the first 4 seconds? The upper part is destroying itself. There's nothing left to destroy the lower part. There's no movement down until now. Take a look. It's a controlled demolition, just like Building 7, in the first 4 seconds. What happens after that? Well, there's belts of explosions, just like the firefighters described. Just like in the other controlled demolition. Does anybody see a pile driver in any of the videos driving the rest of the building down? It is gone. What are we seeing? It looks more like a volcanic eruption, this one in the Tongan Sea in 2009. Upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, lateral ejection of material followed by thick pyroclastic-like white clouds indicating the ends of the beams burning. Looks like a gravitational collapse. What's going on below this massive zone of destruction? We see a very violent series of explosions down here. What else do we see? Look in the lower right corner here. Traveling down at nearly free fall acceleration. Sorry, we don't have that higher. Bands of explosions ahead of 30 stories ahead of what we're told is a gravitational collapse. Do we have a straight down symmetrical progression outside the footprint? This building is 207 feet wide, but its debris is scattered 1,400 feet wide outside the building, well beyond the boundaries of ground zero. Compare that to the nice, neat pile of the classic implosion of Building 7 versus the very, very explosive event after the first 4 seconds known as the World Trade Center destruction. Do we have isolated explosive ejections? Well, yes. And they're issuing pulverized building materials at 160 to 200 feet per second, 20, 40, even 60 stories down below this building, the zone of destruction in the building. Now, NIST tells us, well, this is air being produced by that giant piston or that pile driver. Well, we saw the pile drivers destroyed. First of all, it's not producing any air, but let's say it was. The elevator core, let's say, is behind me in this open office planning, and the perimeter wall is on the far wall, and it pushes all that air down. That air is going to come whooshing into some of these floors. Okay, massive air pressure possibly. It's going to blow out all the windows. Not 1 or 2 in these highly pinpoint accurate, violent, geometric ejections in an obviously engineered pattern like this. How fast is the building coming down? Well, here it starts. 3 seconds. 5, 6, 7, 8,
10,
11, in a dozen seconds or so, each of these buildings is completely shattered, top to bottom, almost free fall acceleration as you add it up. Against that, as if it weren't even there. In other words, that had to not be there in order for the building to come down that fast. How did that not be there? It was removed. How do you remove it? We're going to be looking for additional evidence of explosions. Like this, photographs, videos, the steel skeleton completely shattered, the debris sent well beyond the perimeter of those buildings, the south tower being shattered also, and it starts to fall off. In fact, it's at 22 degrees here. And so, wait, we have asymmetrical damage from the airplanes, asymmetrical damage from the fires, asymmetrical damage from the top of the building falling off. How is the building going to be destroyed symmetrically all the way down to the ground? Like you see here, like the fireman described, like a belt, all these explosions. See, it makes no sense with the official story of destruction by fire or some kind of natural gravitational collapse. Something else is going on here, which you can see up close and try to decide for yourself. Collapse is supposed to be going on 20, 30 stories up above. What's going on down below? Does it even look like a gravitational collapse? And what about that lateral ejection of these freely flying 4-ton structural steel sections ejected at 60 miles an hour laterally outside the buildings? You can see them as we progress in stages here, like particularly this one. Let's go back and catch that again. What was that? Oh, a freely flying 4-ton structural steel section outward, and then gravity pulls it down, so we're looking at a 45-degree trajectory, right? What creates 45 degrees? How does gravity work? Down. What's happening here? Out. This isn't too simple. I mean, too difficult, right? This is 7th grade physics. We get that something's pushing it out. That's got to be some explosive force. There's no other force there. And destroying the Winter Garden 600 feet outside the Twin Towers with these materials. It's enough energy to eject a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. That's a lot of cannonballs, too, thousands of them. So where's all that energy coming? And where are the floors? We had 110 floors in each of these buildings. You know, each of them were an acre in size. That's huge. So, we're looking for 110 floors stacked up at the bottom of a pancaking or gravitational collapse. Where are they? I don't see them. I see a 2-story pile of core columns, perimeter columns, other miscellaneous metal. This is a real progressive collapse over here. It happened in Mexico. That's what we'll be looking for. Maybe 50 of them. Maybe half of them got mangled beyond. Maybe 10 of them. We don't see one. We're talking 90,000 tons of concrete missing from the World Trade Center, each of them, each of the Twin Towers. It's not at the bottom. Where is it? It's being pulverized in midair by some force responsible for its destruction. Up there. Not when it develops its kinetic energy. Down below. 100-micron particles. Most of the dust is very, very small. In fact, it landed river to river across lower Manhattan. Many square miles, 4-inch thick blanket. Mostly concrete. In fact, 30% of many of the samples are concrete. A lot of gypsum.
And you see, there's no concrete. There's very little concrete. All you see is aluminum and steel. What happened to the concrete? Was pulverized. And I was down here Tuesday, and it was like you're on a foreign planet. all of lower Manhattan, not just this site, from river to river, there was dust, powder, 2-3 inches thick. The concrete was just pulverized.
You have 210-story office buildings. You don't find a desk. You don't find a chair. You don't find a telephone, a computer. The biggest piece of a telephone I found was half of the keypad, and it was about this big. The building collapsed to dust.
What I expected to see was nothing like what I actually did see at the time of my arrival at the site. There wasn't much that you could say, you could describe. Everything was dust and metal. There was no typewriters, there was no chairs, there was no nothing.
Well, there were people, lots of people, and unfortunately, we're talking about 700 bone fragments found well after 9/11 on the top of the skyscraper across the street from the South Tower. They were ½ an inch long. Now, they didn't come from the plane that hit the South Tower, shattering those bone fragments, because that sent its ejections out the other side. And they didn't come from the people in the plane hitting the North Tower, because the South Tower completely shielded the Deutsche Bank building, which the bone fragments were found on. So how did they get there? Again, some very explosive force capable of pulverizing concrete and lots of victims. There were 2,749 victims. There were 20,000 pieces of bodies found. 6,000 small enough to fit into a test tube. 1,151 victims, though, remain completely unaccounted for, i.e. pulverized beyond recognition, i.e. vaporized. 1,000 people, you'd expect these people to be trapped between layers in a gravitational collapse. There was 200 pieces matched to one person. This is a little gruesome. But it certainly makes the point. Now, the Twin Towers were here and here. Most of the body pieces were found here, but they're spread out just as far as the steel is spread out. So we have a similar problem here with trying to figure out why body pieces are found all the way over here, 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 and up here. Can gravitational collapse cause such body pulverization and distribution? Okay, going back to that dust, what do we find any evidence of explosives or incendiaries? Well, incendiaries work by heat, as we'll see. And the NFPA, National Fire Protection Association Manual for Fire and Explosion Investigation says, look for thermal effects, heat, because some people start fires with incendiaries. So, is there any documentation? Before, during, and after, plenty of documentation of extreme temperatures, such as is documented by Bechtel at 2,800 degrees. Again, those office fires, 500, maybe 1,000 degrees. 2,800 degrees, Bechtel's saying. And president of the cleanup company himself, he saw pools of literally molten steel. Steel begins to melt at 2,800 degrees. Molten metal is pouring out of the South Tower 10 minutes prior to its collapse, where you can see the fires were worst in this corner, and they were out at this time. So where is this bright yellow molten, has to be molten iron, because NIST says, oh no, this is melted airplane. Well, melted airplane looks silvery in daylight conditions. It's not molten aluminum. Where does the molten iron come from? The end of the beam would be dripping with molten steel. This is firefighter. And it's documented in photographs. Steel members in the debris pile that appear to have been partly evaporated. Now, how do you evaporate steel? You apply 4,000 degrees to it. Where did those temperatures come from? This structural engineer, Abul Hassan Astani, says he saw melting of girders at the World Trade Center. He supports the official story. But he documents what can't possibly support the official story. FEMA also, in their initial 2002 report, does an incredible forensic science investigation of the steel in Appendix C of that report. Melting, capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like this piece from World Trade Center 7. Rapid oxidation, sulfidation, intergranular melting. This is incredible. Where does sulfur come from? We'll be on the lookout for that. Rapid oxidation, high temperatures, melting. Liquid iron. That's molten iron. Documented as iron, not steel. Either way, 2,800 degree temperature minimum. Sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel. They have no idea where the sulfur came from. They say, well, it must have come from the gypsum board because it has calcium sulfate in it. Well, this is gypsum board all around us. It's designed to protect steel. It has never before turned around and attacked it during any kind of a fire event. Concrete pouring, flowing like lava around this police handgun. In the police museum today, you can go see it. Guess what temperatures concrete melts at? I didn't even know it could melt. 3,000 degrees. It's right there, you can see it. But this gentleman, the co-project leader of the NIST report, has this to say about this phenomenon.
First of all, let's go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, no eyewitness who has said so, nobody who's produced it.
You get down below and you see molten steel running down the channel mills. Like you're in a foundry. Like lava.
It actually melted beams where it was molten steel that was being dug out.
Underground, it was still so hot that molten metal dripped down the sides of the wall.
The cleanup was very difficult in the beginning. Steel was coming out red in certain areas from the first couple of weeks.
This fused element of steel, molten steel.
They pulled out a big block of concrete, and there was like a little river of steel flowing.
So there's
Leslie Robertson, the structural engineer of the World Trade Center, who's in a compromised position. He has to support the official story because his firm designs high-rise buildings still today, saying there's a river of steel, but he doesn't understand or refuses to admit that what can create those kinds of temperatures. Back to John Gross, here he is on the pile with his trophy piece that he found, showing partly evaporated steel, requiring 4,000 degree temperatures. But his shadow is all over the evidence. So we certainly are going after him as well. Now, Thomas Iger, a supporter of the official story, said 1,200 degree fires. Okay. NIST says 1,800. We'll give that to them, even though it's impossible and they have no evidence for it. Structural steel doesn't melt until 2,800 degrees. What can do that? Well, thermite is a likely suspect. 4,500 degree issuance of molten iron is the byproduct of that incendiary. Is there evidence, though, at the World Trade Center of that material? Could thermite have produced all that molten metal? And what is thermite anyway?
An incendiary used by the military, thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel. We know that open-air fires cannot burn hot enough to melt steel, but metal had melted at the base of the towers. Appendix C of the FEMA report describes sulfur residues on the World Trade Center steel. The New York Times called this the deepest mystery of all. Sulfur slightly lowers the melting point of iron, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the structural steel. Sulfur used with thermite is called thermate, producing even faster results.
Maybe we're getting somewhere. We have a possible substance that can answer all this. But was it found at the World Trade Center dust? Well, an analysis of the dust finds what? The USGS, US Geological Survey, finds in all of their samples of the World Trade Center dust these previously molten iron droplets, the diameter of a human hair. Whoa! What do they say about it? They don't. They don't speculate. They don't even mention where they could be, what they could be from. Yet up to 6% of the dust is comprised of these curious, unknown, previously molten iron microspheres. It's a signature component. It's not even World Trade Center dust in it unless it has those things in it. So how would those things get in the World Trade Center dust? Well, if you had thousands of cutter charges with thermite laced throughout the building, and under explosive conditions that thermite is going on, you might have the dispersion of that liquid. What happens when a liquid is dispersed? Like from this spray bottle, millions of small droplets, because that's what liquid does when it's dispersed. It forms itself into spheres. Raindrops are actually spheres. They're not teardrop shaped. Anyway, so they cool, they fall, they mix with all the dust. Is that not the most rational explanation for these unexplained spheres? Could it not explain the toasting of the tops of these cars, that no other rational explanation for it exists? So here's tens of thousands of molten iron droplets falling, cooling. So we know what happens when thermite is lit in a controlled experiment. In fact, at the World Trade Center, the chemical analysis reveals of these, we have oxygen, silica, aluminum, iron, the ingredients of thermite. In a controlled experiment, you take thermite and you get the same thing, basically. So we know that those spheres are from thermite. That's pretty revealing. We also know that there's patented cutter charges that are designed to issue in hundreds of milliseconds molten iron through the orifice, cutting through structural steel like a hot knife through butter. And that this existed before 9/11. Now, why would they use something which is very expensive instead of normal high-energy explosives in cutter charges or shaped cutter charges that they usually use to cut through steel? Well, they provide a loud bang, lots of them, and bright flashes, much brighter than even you saw here. So they couldn't use that. Remember, this is a deceptive, controlled demolition. 3 of them. So, but they had to put up with the byproducts of thermite and then deny it, which just seems to be what happened. But not only do we find molten iron droplets in the dust, we find something else. Unignited thermite in the dust, as well as a residue of ignited thermite. In fact, a small team of scientists led by Stephen Jones and Niels Harrit in Copenhagen, they find in the 4 independently collected samples of dust that people provided to them they find the same curious red-gray chips. They come up to a magnet, so we know they have iron in them, one of the key components of thermite. But what else is in the red layer? Oh my gosh. Carbon, oxygen, aluminum, iron, the ingredients of thermite in the red layer. What's that doing there? Well, real curious, they zoom in 50,000 times with the nuclear microscope. What do they find? Fascinating rhomboidal crystals of iron oxide. That's rust, which is a key ingredient of thermite. At a scale that's 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. These are nanoscale materials. They're not made by grinding material up. They're made from the atomic scale. It's fascinating. And aluminum platelets, slightly larger. Set in an organic bed of oxygen, silica, and carbon. Carbon, or organic materials, expand when they're heated up or explode. They provide the explosive force. So here you have an incendiary which works by heat, lots of heat, but because of its small size of these particles, you have a vast surface area, so it ignites very quickly and expands this organic material, so it becomes explosive. This is very, very high tech. In fact, you put this stuff in a heater and you can ignite it. Little tiny chips. What do they produce at 420 degrees centigrade? They produce the same spheres that are found in the World Trade Center dust with the same chemical analysis. So you see, it's a completely internally consistent, self-corroborating set of evidence that in a courtroom, for example, that's not corrupt, could put a lot of people away for treason and mass murder. This is solid evidence. As if we didn't know, though, where those spheres came from. They're found attached to partially ignited red-gray chips in all the World Trade Center dust samples as well. The stuff is not made in a cave in Afghanistan. It's one of the most sophisticated processes known and made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratory. So if you want to know who to investigate, we can start with the half-dozen companies that make this stuff. I haven't researched who they are, but this research is documented in a peer-reviewed paper in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal. It stands uncontested. Nobody's come up with their own peer-reviewed paper, which is the way to challenge kooky ideas and ideas that don't make sense. Put up your own peer-reviewed paper with your own experiment. Hasn't been done in 4 years. So we believe that the hypothesis is corroborated of explosive demolition here. We believe that all 10 key characteristics of controlled demolition and some unconventional characteristics, as you just saw, is direct evidence of explosive destruction. And fire can't create any one of them, let alone all 10. With additional corroborating evidence, we also believe this is proof of controlled demolition. I asked you 3 questions before. I would love to ask you the same questions once again. How many of you believe the official story still that fires and jet planes brought these buildings down? How many are unsure? How many think that they were brought down by some form of explosive controlled demolition? First, the official story. Anybody? We had 2 before. Oh, you! Thank you. How many are unsure? You might be still unsure. 1, 2, 3. We had a whole bunch unsure before. In fact, 30. We had 22 unsure before. Gosh, something happened in the room. How many of you think these were brought down by controlled demolition? Okay, so let's talk. Because I want to get to your questions. You must have 100 of them. You know, we've seen that explosives and incendiaries were used, most likely used to destroy these buildings. And it takes months of advanced planning and execution to place these explosives. Who had the means, the opportunity, the motive to carry out this crime? Who benefited? These are the classic questions that have to be answered by enterprising journalists and criminal prosecutors, right? Who had access to these highly secure buildings? And who had access to this very sophisticated material? Well, the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth don't speculate about these matters. We don't have conspiracy theories either. We're just laying out the evidence so the American people can come to their own conclusions. What you've seen, this evidence, with respect to the World Trade Center, is only a small slice of the pie of all of the major questions raised by members of the 9/11 Truth movement, which is millions strong around the world, relative to issues like who were the hijackers, what planes actually crashed, why were there drills that send our fighters in every direction on the morning of 9/11 prior to the planes ever being hijacked, leaving only 2 fighter jets or so to govern, to protect the United States, and yet they were sent, at least one of them, out to sea before coming back. Why at the Pentagon do we have an unskilled pilot who failed Cessna flying school doing a maneuver with 370 degrees all around the Pentagon and flying into not Donald Rumsfeld's office, but the accounting office that was looking for $2.3 trillion in unknown expenditures? That was announced the day before 9/11. Why were millions and millions of dollars made by people who bet that the value of the airline companies would go down the next day? And why was that investigation stopped when the 9/11 commissioners realized that it wasn't Al-Qaeda that was betting on this, and we didn't have to take that investigation any farther? Is that there wasn't any other options? Questions like that are numerous and ominous that must be answered in a real investigation. So this is just the beginning for all of us into this ominous journey, very essential to uncover the rest of the mystery. So we need to follow up. Relative to the World Trade Center, this is the DVD you saw the trailer of. Very important to get it into your hands and the hands of others. So please don't walk away without it today. The version we have here is only $10. And for $5, Ed Asner video, 15 minutes, just on World Trade Center 7. Some people say if you don't have a book, then nothing you say can be credible. Well, okay, so we got a book. It's this little book here. You're welcome to take it home with you too. I don't remember what it costs. And there's other books that are available online, specifically by researcher David Ray Griffin, that goes well beyond the mission of AE 9/11 Truth, with the other events on 9/11. There's a whole bunch of materials that some of you just want to be, you're like Sean here at this church. You're willing to go to Sam's Club and pray for complete strangers, and you don't care what they think about you. They'll come up to you and say, "Oh, thank you," or they'll flip you off, or do whatever they do. But in the 9/11 Truth Movement, we're kind of missionaries like that. So we'll go into Sam's Club with our hat. So we have a hat. It's not even here, but there's hats back there you can wear. People will ask you. You don't have to go up to them and say, "Can I pray for you?" They'll come up to you and say, "What is that statement, Rethink 9/11, on your hat or T-shirt?" Stand up with the T-shirt. This gentleman came in today with his T-shirt. Says, "Did you know a third tower fell on 9/11?" On the back. Rethink911.org. The evidence might surprise you. That's our theme. So we have bumper stickers. We got newspapers. Some people say, "Hey, if it's not in a newspaper, I won't believe it." We got a newspaper. We can pass that out. All right? They might believe you. Or at least listen to you. We're asking everybody to call, write your congressman, local television stations, radio stations. Email the ae911truth.org link to every architect and engineer you can find, everybody else that you know. Some people say, what can I do? I'm just one guy. Well,
the 4/5 of the building below. When we talk about a pyramidal type structure, what we're really talking about is on the first or second floor of, say the second floor of a 110-story building, the columns at that location need to be able to resist the mass above. So you're talking about 108 stories of mass that they need to resist, as compared to the 109th story columns need to hold up 1 story's mass vertically. You know, when we're talking about horizontal or wind. But that's why they're so much larger. That's why they're so much thicker, denser material. So the idea, even if they were all the same, you know, mass or thickness, that 1/5 could crush 4/5 in that time period and completely dismember it. I think anybody who thinks about that logically, you don't have to have a degree in architecture or engineering, it doesn't make sense. But to think that the lightest 1/5 would completely dismember the bottom, it's impossible. And then it happened again. And then World Trade Center 7 came down and wasn't hit by a building. NIST admits free fall acceleration for a certain period of time, which again means you could drop a bowling ball from the top of that roof line, and as fast as it would hit the ground, that's as fast as the roof elevation was descending over that time period. So you'd have to imagine an interconnected grid of steel columns, beams, floor slabs, connections that a lot of times, you know, hold 20,000 pounds per square inch in tensile strength. Welds that, you know, when done properly, are actually stronger than the member itself, the part that wasn't welded. They're impacting the ground and offering no resistance whatsoever for a period of time. It's just physically impossible. I've heard a lot of the, you know, debunking, so to speak, arguments. I would encourage everyone to look into those as well. Nobody should, you know, it's a really, it was a terrible thing that happened that day. It has so many ramifications. It's hard to talk about. People are scared of it. So go research the other side too, but please come back with an open mind. See what the debunkers say. Come back to what architects and engineers from 9/11 Truth have to say. Look at Stephen Jones's work from BYU, the professor emeritus in physics. Niels Harrit from the University of Copenhagen. And I really believe if you look at it with an open mind, objectively, you'll come to the same conclusion that I have. And I want to thank Richard Gage for coming here today, and for everyone here who came to try to find out the truth of what happened that day.
Thank you.
Have the demolition experts ever estimated the amount of powder it would take to drop all 3 of those buildings?
Well, we're not talking about powder, I don't think. And they may have, I don't know the answer to that question.
Rather than powder, the term
But
explosive.
what we do know is that if you calculate or extrapolate based on what the officials from the USGS say about how much of this previously molten iron droplets are in the dust, up to 6%, you can, in some samples and less than others, you can extrapolate that there was 10 tons of the residue of ignited thermite. That's 10 tons of residue of, so that's at least 10 tons of thermite right there, right? Plus the unignited thermite in the small red-gray chips may be almost as much, 10 tons of unignited thermite. So there's 20 tons of material minimum that had to have passed through under the noses of the security company. Who owned these companies is a very important question. And who was on the board of directors of Securicom and Stratosec, whose security contract ended, curiously enough, the day of 9/11. They turn out to be relatives of the President of the United States at the time, which is interesting, but it's not evidence. But we do need an investigation of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
have to confess that I hadn't thought twice about this until I began hearing about it on the radio about 2 weeks ago. It prompted me to go to the web, and I saw some video, some of which I think originated perhaps in your DVD, saying that the elevators had been replaced, refurbished, perhaps a year before in the towers.
That's true. Let me tell you that story, and then I'll let you come to your question, because it's extremely important. I want everybody to understand, how could explosives have been placed in these towers without occupants knowing? Well, if you look at the core of this building, and which is blown up for you right here, so to speak, the elevator shafts are immediately adjacent to the core columns and beams in the building. So if you had access to these elevator shafts, you would have access to place and plant those explosives. So that is one possibility. And actually, it's quite interesting that we had the largest elevator modernization going on in history the 9 months prior to 9/11. And it's documented in the March issue 2001 of Elevator World. Ace Elevator had 85 employees in the building at the time that they were hit, and they fled. This was actually quite a scandal, documented in USA Today in October, right after 9/11 on October. We certainly want an investigation of Ace Elevator, whose only main contract was the World Trade Center skyscrapers, who were singularly unqualified compared to Otis Elevator, who installed the elevators, to perform this maintenance. So the company's, in my mind, is in suspicion, needs to be investigated, clearly.
So I gather from the slide we were just looking at that they could not have had access to the perimeter columns. Do you know if there was any work on the elevators in Building 7 connected with that, or not?
I don't know about access in Building 7, such as a story like this. There was tenants that were moving around. We don't seem to have the details on that. But there were a lot of tenants moving around in the World Trade Center. So they may or may not have had access to the outside. If they didn't, then my speculation would be that they had to have enough explosive energy in the inside to not only blow the inside, but also the outside. Thus, the World Trade Center Twin Towers becoming a very explosive event, hurling these girders, columns, 60 miles an hour, landing 600 feet. It could have been an over-designed job for that reason, without access to the perimeter.
Additionally, there's some video of, I think it's Silverstein, whose company owns Building 7, saying to someone off camera, take it down.
Hold on. Let me clarify that, because this is also very important, and we want to get it right.
You're familiar with it.
Yeah. So PBS has a year later, America Rebuilds television program. They interviewed Larry Silverstein. He's there saying, well, there's been such terrible loss of life. He's talking to the fire commander, and they made the determination. Oh God!
I told him to pull it.
Give the order to pull the building.
They made the determination.
Pull it, I believe, is the phrase I heard.
Yeah, so he said pull it, and so they gave the order, and we watched the building come down, and so that's what he said. And everybody goes, "What? What are you talking about?" Oh, I meant pull the firemen out of the building. Well, what he said could not conceivably been construed to mean that. And the firemen weren't even in the building. They were told not to go in and fight the fire. They were told there was structural damage. They were waiting for it to come down on its own, which it miraculously did for the first time in history.
So you're familiar with that, and you discount it, or you regard it as further evidence?
No, I think it's important to look at, and he needs to be investigated clearly as well. But it's not evidence of controlled demolition, so you didn't see it in my program.
Just one other question. If there were a follow-up investigation, is it really possible to conduct one? Is there still enough physical evidence and data evidence around to do so?
Yeah, there's plenty of evidence. In fact, the Fresh Kills landfill in New York has been covered with 6 feet of concrete over the dust, which they swept up and trucked out of New York, put it in the ground and buried it. So it's all there, interestingly enough, and a lot of people have this dust. So it's available. There's a lot of steel sculptures around, including here in Pennsylvania. And there's also plenty of video testimony, eyewitness testimony, and steel that has been forensically examined. It's just being ignored, the evidence. It's not a problem of having a lack of evidence.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, these will be our last 2 questions, and then we'll have to break. We can talk more in the room, and I'll have to leave in about 15 minutes. And go ahead.
With the explosives, would all the floors in the buildings be destroyed from the explosives?
Well, first of all, the floors were destroyed, and I mean all of them, each an acre in size, 4 inches thick. 110 of them in each building, completely pulverized to powder. So the question is, what could do that? And my speculation at this point is high-energy explosives could do that, placed closely to the floor, perhaps underneath the floor, in the guise of a fireproofing operation, which was going on in the World Trade Center also the months before 9/11, specifically in the areas above and below the point of jet plane impacts in those buildings, which is very carefully documented by Kevin Ryan in an article on journalofnine11studies.com, which is full of great technical articles on the subject.
Also, and wasn't there supposed to be like a 2-floor pocket where there were some people that were like saved from when it came down? There was like a 2-floor pocket of...
2-4?
2-floor.
Tube floor.
Yeah.
Well, there was a stairwell which had at least 3 or 4 firefighters in it that they survived in that stairwell after the towers came down on top of them. It's a total miracle.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Last one.
Yeah, first I really want to thank you for your work. I've been watching your videos and your speeches, and I just am very, very grateful for the work that you're doing for our country.
Thank you.
And you know, from my study, from your work and the work of others, it really does appear to me to make the most sense that was a cover-up of maybe epic proportions, because worldwide there was a cover-up. So my question to you is, what progress has been made in terms of really achieving a new independent investigation? And because the cover-up seems to be so strong, what do you anticipate can be the catalyst for there really to be a genuine new investigation?
Well, we know this, that our petition, which calls upon Congress for accountability, really, but it calls upon them to investigate 9/11, we have to lay accountability at their footsteps. And it's not like it's not like we believe they're actually going to do it because they've done nothing. We've given them our petition when we had 1,000 architects, 2,000 architects and engineers, and they've got our DVDs. We've met with 36 of them. Hundreds and hundreds of people have met with their congresspeople over this issue, and nothing has been done. So while we don't give up hope there, we do need to document that we have made them accountable. We also, I liken it, you said, what evidence do we have that there's progress? Here's my evidence. In the 8 years I've been trying to raise awareness on this issue, it's like a swimming pool, and you're filling it. And you know, you come back and you sit there and watch it, and it looks like no progress, right? But every once in a while there's a little bit of progress. Like, for instance, we're on Geraldo, where he says, oh my God, 1,300 architects showing Building 7 going down right there on mainstream media. Fox News. He's really impressed, which is great. He had one of our engineers from here in Pennsylvania, Tony Zambodi, and he had Bob McIlvain, also from the Philadelphia area, on his show, and they gave their evidence. It was fair and balanced reporting. Yay, Geraldo. But that was November 2009. Then we had a great interview opportunity on C-SPAN, where for 45 minutes, I had the opportunity to give people the evidence you heard today. And they even showed Building 7 coming down, which was great. And that video has now become the most watched video on their Washington Journal TV program of all of them, which is incredible. So people are getting, they're able to see it. So that's some progress. But they come in spurts like that. But normally, if you come back a year later, the swimming pool is higher. It is higher. And it's higher today, and I'll prove this to you in a second. The level of awareness of the American people is higher than it was before. How many of you, specifically Anthony, I know has been handing out literature for years, like 5 years ago, you're handing out literature, what was the general response 5 years ago versus like today from the numbers of people that are receptive?
5, 6, 7 years ago on the streets of New York, we were heckled. People literally wanted to fight us. We were threatened with arrest by the police, and we were treated as literal scum of the earth. Yeah, and now when we go there and we stand there, people are a lot more receptive. There's a lot more people that have an idea of what's going on. They're a lot more curious, and the whole atmosphere of them being as abrasive as they were has changed. It's completely different as it was. I mean, it was sacrilegious to talk about 9/11 6, 7 years ago on the streets of New York. I go out to New York for a week every year for 9/11. It was sacrilegious to even speak a word, of what we're saying. But now people are a lot more receptive to it. The cops actually shut down roads so we could walk around handing out pamphlets. So, I mean, a lot of the police, the family members, they're on our sides, most of them. They want us out there asking the real questions because they, lost people. So, yeah, it's changed a lot in the time that, I've been doing this and, that a lot of the other activists have been doing this. So it's a snowball effect. There was a couple people in the beginning, other people got inspired, and the numbers started to grow, and that's that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Experiences? Go ahead.
Before you leave, I have a paper that I'd like to show you.
All right, I'll take your paper. And with that, once again, I want to thank Sean and Justin and your families for bringing us here. We're so grateful. And thank you very much. We can talk to you some more offline. You know who the people are that spoke up. You can talk to them. And we'll see you all when we come back to Scranton.
I'd be able to do anything. And now I've given 400 presentations. And I've reached millions and millions and millions of people through radio and TV interviews. We had the fortune to get on C-SPAN's Washington Journal for 45 minutes, where only usually the senators and the representatives get on so that they can determine their views. Well, so many people saw that since August that last week we became the #1 viewed video on that program, Washington Journal. It's an incredible achievement. But I only did it because I started 8 years ago putting one foot in front of the other with my wife at the time. I gave her a presentation, and then 14 architects. They became the first 14 architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. Because I had the courage to be called a conspiracy theorist, a kook, a tinfoil hat wearing whatever, but when I bought them pizza, brought them into the conference room, made them sit down and eat it, and digest what I was really wanting them to eat, they all agreed with me. Those are controlled demolitions. The first 14 architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. So it does start with you, not anybody else. And I encourage you to sign our petition, take a stand. You don't have to be an architect or engineer. We have 20,000 others as well. You can volunteer with us. We need help on our public outreach team, translation teams, fundraising teams, writing team. If any of you are writers, we do need writers and presenters. And we want you to be a local 8E911 Truth local contact, which means you're willing to accept calls from people and you'll be on our website. It doesn't mean you're an expert on this evidence. It means you're willing to take calls from people who live in your area and kind of work it out and affirm to where they need to go. Better than that, an 8E911 Truth action group. We want one in every city. Who's going to be the one in Newfoundland to say, hey, we're going to meet once a month and it's going to be at the coffee shop and I'm going to be there. It's going to be at my house. We're going to wake up Newfoundland. You know, this is a great start, isn't it, for Newfoundland? And so that's an action group. And you're going to hear from local activists during our question and answer period, which is going to start right now. So you can be a member of 8E911 Truth for as little as $2.50 a month. Well, how much of coffee? That's like 2 ounces of coffee. All right? So you can help us out that way. We have expenses that are ongoing. I have to go all around the world. And we do things that we don't get paid for, right? So help us. Become a member. Your donation is tax deductible. Whatever you do, though, follow your conscience and act. Because if we allow the truth about 9/11 to be swept under the rug of history, we'll have more false flag attacks. And that's exactly what this was, a false flag attack, which is the way that wars have almost always been started, particularly the last wars and the last century that we've been involved in. And somebody else can talk about some of those attacks, where one country attacks itself, blames it on another, riles up its people through manipulation of the media to go to war, like Afghanistan and Iraq. We'll have more wars around the world then, with millions more killed, more economic manipulation, worsening financial crises, $4.5 trillion on the global war on terror so far, $18 trillion in debt. It's unrecoverable in this country. It should shock, concern, and devastate all of us. To motivation to change it, to do something about it. More loss of our civil liberties, and we become a whole lot less safe. Whereas the truth about 9/11 illuminates these lies and results in the rectification of each of these disasters. So we see 9/11 in a whole new light, as a means of exposing massive corruption to its heights. More importantly, though, as a way of recovering from its ills. Because 9/11 is just so powerful. A wake-up call to so many of us. So it's not too late to discover for yourself, where do you draw your line in the sand, personally? I mean, do you wait for the next 9/11? Predicted by members of Congress and media to be far worse than the last? Oh, this is the time to act. Speak the truth, for a time comes when our silence is betrayal. Thank you so very much. You've been so patient. And so, we'd like to have you ask your questions, and Jim will find me a microphone, or Robert, and we'll want to encourage you to use the microphone. We'll find a way to get it to you. Here comes Robert now. Over here is our first question. Yeah, there was... Microphone's right behind you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you stand up and belt it out too?
Yes. There have been reports or speculation about mini nukes being used. Has there been any kind of evidence that you're aware of that would suggest that they were used?
No. There are those who promote such evidence, but the fact is that nuclear weapons provide incredibly loud blasts that we heard well outside New York, Manhattan, at least. Very, very bright flashes, brighter than the sun, you can see, and radiation levels that would by 1,000 times exceed the radiation levels that were above background radiation that we saw at the World Trade Center. Next question.
I just want to ask, I heard that a lot of people were told not to report to work that day. And
I've heard that too, and you know, I haven't researched that. So
because it seems odd that only under 3,000 people died that day, yet with those three buildings, I think a lot more than 3,000 people had to at least work or inhabit those buildings.
And many of them got out before because they had the courage, or whatever you might call it, to leave the building when the plane hit the building and caught on fire. But there was this announcement that said, stay in your offices or you may be fired. Now, there's, what, 100 different tenants at least in these buildings. And what kind of a statement is that to be made from a central security office who has no authority over any of those employees? So, that's outside our scope, but I found it very interesting.
And one other question I had is, I also heard something about in the basement of one of those buildings, it be housed for gold bullion.
Yes, in fact, there was a gold robbery, most researchers realized, going on. Apparently, the truck had been abandoned, and there's gold in the truck. And later, they say, well, that gold melted and disappeared. I don't know what happened to it. But, yes, ma'am.
Yes, my name's Julie. And I saw a documentary.
Can't hear you.
I saw a thing by Jesse Ventura, and he did an investigation where he said it was explosive and it was thermite, and he said it was with paint that he said he saw there were contractors painting.
Yeah, let me take that.
Is that a possibility?
Let me take that up for you. Kevin Ryan, an extraordinary researcher on 9/11, very, very in-depth, in the Journal of 9/11studies.com, documented that several floors above and below the point of jet plane impacts in each tower, which was lower in the South Tower, higher in the North Tower, there was a retrofit going on of fireproofing. Now, given that the red grade chips are flat and multi-layered, it is likely that they were applied in a fluid. And so Kevin and most of us suspect that this was applied, I think, on the underside of the floors and in the guise of a fireproofing retrofit, because the bottoms of floors are sprayed. Usually it's a more cementitious looking material, but this could have been done. We don't have much more evidence than that. Wherever the microphone is, keep your hand up high and Robert will find you.
I have two questions. One is, you're not going to send these planes unless you're absolutely certain that the building's going to be brought down by your charges, right? So, has there been...
That's quite a statement. Can I rephrase it just so we can catch up, people can catch up with you?
Okay.
The question behind the question is, who was in charge of those planes? How did they know that 19 hijackers, or however many there were on these planes, were going to hit the towers in the first place, and that they would actually accomplish that mission, and that you could then coordinate it with this controlled demolition? Well, most thinking people realize that if this is an inside operation, then those very sophisticated planners of this operation are going to make darn sure that they have control of that airplane and it is not being flown by people who also failed Cessna flying school. Most pilots say they couldn't hit a 200-foot wide target at 500 miles an hour. Many pilots say you can't fly a plane that low at 500 miles an hour, it comes apart. Whatever the case is, those planes were probably remotely guided and outfitted to be more highly maneuverable. In fact, there's some evidence for that. I won't go into it here.
So you're not going to get to go unless you're absolutely certain that your charges are going to work, resulting in the collapse of the building. Because it's a waste of the airplane, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, it's a waste of a lot of things. Yeah. The airplane's being listed among them.
So has there been any questioning about test facilities, residue at test facilities, letting people know what a test facility might look like, what kind of product might come out of test facility, anything like that? And that's my first question.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. My second question is, what is the most difficult question you've had to receive in opposition to what you...
Well, let's talk about Steve Corbett. How many of you know Steve Corbett?
I called him today.
You called him today?
His house and invited him.
And you went to his house?
I called him.
Well, Steve Corbett is a radio talk show host, and I was on his show for 17 minutes yesterday and the day before. And I was trying to give evidence to his listeners, some of which you saw here. I can do it pretty quick. I mean, even in 5 minutes or less. And so Steve Corbett spent 15 of those 17 minutes challenging my credibility, saying, how much money do you make? How much do you sell your DVDs for? On and on and on, a complete distraction from what really is the issues. So, as a result, some people are upset at Steve. How many are upset at Steve Corbett right now? He just, that's what he does.
You don't agree with him, he overtalks you, he interrupts you constantly. I don't even turn him on. If I have IOK on and his commercial comes on for Budget Wines, I change the channel.
So what?
I can't stand to hear his voice anymore.
So what did you do at Steve's house?
I called him this morning and invited him, in honor of our troops and everything, please come and look at this, and he hung up on me.
Oh, so you got his home phone number?
It's right in the phone book. I know that.
What's the number? I tell everybody, you can all call him. We're just making this a mess. Yeah. Yes, sir. We'll come back to you.
My name is Gary. Richard, you talked about the kind of energy that was used.
Speak up. Me?
The kind of energy that was used to cut the steel. What kind of energy can you theorize was behind pulverizing the concrete? That's my first question.
Great, because incendiaries are a material that uses heat to destroy, usually steel structures. Explosives are what are used to move objects, like 4-ton structural steel perimeter framing sections and twin towers. So, the question is, if nanothermite, which is engineered to be more explosive, was put in the fluid layer underneath the floors, could that pulverize the concrete? We don't know. Was there some combination, high energy explosives and incendiaries? We don't know. I presume there were high energy explosives at work.
And the second question is, from anything that you know, architecturally speaking, can you give us an idea of why different means were employed for Building 7 as opposed to 1 and 2, North and South?
Building 7 was a classic implosion. There was very historic buildings nearby, particularly the post office, and I'm sure they didn't want to destroy that. I don't know why they saw fit to be willing to destroy half of a good percentage of Manhattan in a very explosive demolition, basically destroying everything for us, a 1,400-foot radius. But it might have been because we had the core columns here accessible via the elevator shafts. And maybe they didn't have access because of occupants to put explosives in the exterior columns. So maybe the explosives had to be so strong to blow out not only the core, but the perimeter as well, which would be a very explosive event. That's my speculation. How would they get explosives into this building? Well, again, the elevator shafts would be great because you've got the core columns and perimeter column, core columns right there. In fact, there was an elevator modernization going on the 9 months prior to 9/11. Documented March of 2001 in the elevator world. Ace Elevator had this contract, and they were in the middle of this modernization. They had 85 employees in the building at the time the planes hit, and they fled. It was really quite a scandal that they didn't stay and help the firefighters rescue the victims with these elevator cabs, which they are experts in. So, we certainly want an investigation of Ace Elevator because they certainly were in a position to know. Also, the security company, under whose noses would have had to travel up to 20, 30 tons of very sophisticated incendiaries and explosives. Security company was Securicom Stratocent.
Last night's conversation.
Mike Gonzalez, I'd like to interject some plausible deniability into your main hypothesis.
Okay.
All right. Now, in the presentation, I saw it down in Scranton. I said it was very impressive, and the scientific analysis and everything is hard to doubt about the thermite and possibility of additional interference in the takedown of World Trade Center of buildings. But in the late 70s, early 80s, I'm a big fan of public television. I was watching a documentary come in about a huge windstorm. And the name of the documentary was something like, I don't have to remember exactly. It was how the World Trade Towers almost came down. And it was over a windstorm in the late 70s, early 80s. And they brought in the architect that designed it, some of them and their people, and engineers that designed the material, and explained how the building was set up. It's different than a lot of buildings, the way it's structured. What you have said about the core being the main support structure in the center of the building, not necessarily like the pyramid effect up on the outside and right on the top, but the center. And that he said because of that structure, the wind took the top. It was an unusual wind gust. And it swayed, which the building was meant to be swayed. It swayed the corner brackets in some of those key top floors, maybe 20, 30, 40 stories down. And he said it bent them to the point where they could have failed. And he said if they failed, he said he thought this architect, engineer, whoever he was, that it was pretty close. And if they bent to that point, that corner brackets would fail, and the weight of the top floors could come down and pancake it down and cause an implosion. He didn't say how many floors. He said it would be taken down, meaning maybe it would topple over, maybe 20 floors, maybe 10 floors, whatever. So then they took the people through a tour of those inner structures. And on the inner structures there was fireproofing. So the reporter asked, well, how about a fire? Could a fire do this to these buildings? He said, if they're not properly fireproof, like you can see here, this fireproofing around these critical joints are wearing out. And if a fire happened where the temperature reached X amount of degrees, and I don't remember those exact numbers, it would not necessarily melt it, but it would weaken it to the point where it would be the same effect as the wind, bending the structure and causing that pancaking implosion.
Yeah, let me address that, because that's pretty important. I was unaware of that specific structure.
It's still available on PBS, I'm sure.
Well, if you'd be willing to send me a link, I would like to look at it. But, however the building fails, in a progressive collapse, you could have maybe one slab falling on another due to a starting point of failures, but that would leave the entire perimeter structure standing vertically, end welded, butt welded, end to end, 14-inch square steel tube columns every 3 feet 9 inches, 3 feet 4 inches all the way around the building. And the core columns saved butt welded end on end. They're not going anywhere, particularly in free fall acceleration. There might be, in fact, there was an experiment that said if you started one slab and you dropped it on another without any columns, there's still at least 30 seconds. I said 90 yesterday, I meant 30. 30 seconds just from the hesitation of one slab hitting another. This building came down in 12 seconds. So thank you very much. We got to go on. I'm sorry, we're running out of time.
Hi, my name is James Soto. I'm actually a member. I'm a signer of the petition. I'm an electrical engineer.
How many signers are there on the petition? Say architects and engineers first, and now others.
Yeah, I signed like 3 years ago.
Hope everybody will sign.
I was actually on a conference call with you a couple of years ago when I signed, because I worked in Building 7, and we were talking about, because I built Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management.
You helped build that, the electrical components?
I did, what do you call it, the tray tables, you know what I mean? We did the wiring for that and stuff. We built the stations, because it had that office had like computers for hooked into every, you know, federal agency, state agency, I mean, the sanitation city agency. It was like FEMA was there, FBI, CIA, everybody. And my question is about building. You're an architect, so you know that for every building that's designed in a high, skyscraper, is there a? I heard this that there's that they have to submit a demolition plan for that building. Is that true?
No. No, when you get a permit to build a structure, you do not simultaneously ever get a permit to demolish it also.
No, I mean, I think you have to submit a plan for demolition.
I've never heard of it. Has anybody heard of that? Any architects or engineers? I've never heard of that.
All right, thank you.
Good question.
Yes, Richard, I'm Bob Sowers. I've been a ham radio operator for about 40 years. I'm not at all skeptical of what you're talking about. I just wondered why it took so long for you to get out here and do this. You explained that it took you 8 years to do this.
How long did it take you, Sean, to get me here? That's the question. Ask him.
But the question that I have for you is, through shortwave radio, I've been listening to a gentleman by the name of Alex Jones, and I've listened to him religiously for over 10 years. He seems to tell the truth, and he has talked about everything you have talked about in his show. I'm just curious, are you aware of Alex Jones?
He's had me on his show about 5 times.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. In the back there.
I'm Tom Lee. Curious why we can only have 2,300 architects and engineers. Can the rest come on board, or where are they?
Yeah, they sure can, and we invite them wholeheartedly to come and sign our petition. There's thousands and thousands of architects and engineers in the United States, and the problem is they don't know about the evidence. The American Institute of Architects did not tell them about this evidence because they were probably unaware of it also. They just bought the official story, hook, line, and sinker, and we have been challenging them for 8 years with giving them our DVDs, giving them our petition, telling them, hey, we have 118 AIA members, including myself. When are you? They're afraid of something, I think. You know, architects design the big, important, tall buildings, and the wealthiest people in the world and the federal government are their clients. And so there's and those people don't seem to be interested in the truth about 9/11. So they're at cross purposes. They're stuck, I think, between a rock and a hard place. We have the attention of several people on the board at the AIA. So we're working it. In fact, we submitted a resolution signed by 54 AIA members to the AIA last week, and we'll hear about it this week, whether that gets voted on successfully by the board members. At least it'll get them talking. We also have a booth that's 20 feet long, 10 feet deep, to reach 14,000 architects at the next convention in Atlanta, May 14. So anybody wants to fly to Atlanta and help us, we'd love to have you. Back here. Would you stand up?
Thank you for coming. Thank you for speaking up. You remind me of a Norman Rockwell picture where you see the fellow out standing up and speaking. You'd have to be a art person to appreciate it, but this fellow's standing up and speaking, so I thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
One of the first things that struck me with these trade towers were the people jumping out. I was in those trade towers many years ago. Being in the top floors, those buildings swayed. And I already thought, boy, if you ever had to get out of this building, how would you ever get out? When I saw these people jumping from the buildings, it amazed me that they were jumping because they were already giving up hope. And why would they not go to the roof? Why would there not be a
Well,
plane?
the roof was locked. They couldn't get there. The smoke was so heavy they couldn't breathe. I don't think they had much choice.
Right. But my point is these people were jumping for a reason. They were getting out of that building. Judy Wood, I believe in her documentary, said that every minute 3 people were jumping out per side of that building. To me, that's a key note to this. These people were getting out of town because there was something going on that they couldn't take inside the building. Regardless of how these buildings come down, whether you're right or Judy Wood or somebody else is right, you have to say the motive. When you look up these conspiracies, and I'm not talking just trade towers, but when you look up Sandy Hook, you look up Federal Reserve, you look up all the corruption that has been going on, they've piled their sins to heaven. And so what are they doing? They're getting rid of evidence. The Enron, the FBI files in that number 7 building, they got rid of evidence. Last, I want to hog it. You, when you first started, you said there was a psychologist by the name of Griffin?
Yes.
Can you elaborate on this? Does he have a...
That's a great question. I'm going to introduce him right now. So thank you for introducing him. Robert Griffin, a psychologist. Would you stand up and come forward? I want to introduce to you one of the heroes of the 9/11 Truth Movement, a psychologist, one of very, very few who's willing to stand up and tell us what is the big problem here with these people who will not, cannot listen to what I think, and you guys think by show of hands, is fairly scientific proof that we have been scammed on 9/11. Robert, what is their problem? Which is our problem, right?
Now that's not a question that they teach courses on, and that that we get to speak on. Or there's some people really researching why it's difficult to believe, or to believe the government could do things other than what they might say, particularly on something like this. But we've had generations of conditioning, both as in our families, in our media, and patterns are relating to the media and the government that we don't question, and that are many of our ways that we look at security. That is, these are social. These are how we're socialized, and that children are usually not socialized. This is a tough thing to explain. It's a tough thing for for children to wrap their heads around, and that most people are good in the world. Most people are trying to do good, and we've kind of become estranged from our government and our role in it. That many people would say, just the size of the country, after it gets beyond a certain point, like the state, it's very hard and unwieldy a democracy to participate. I saw too, there was a person, the minister, I believe, from the church, had filed something with the county commissioners about the National Defense Authorization Act. I go, wow, that's pretty amazing. Just to see oneself, the relationship. So the minister had seen himself in relationship as someone who's an adult participating, and that this was a relationship with the government officials. That's not the way we're raised, though, and conditioned for most people. Just mind your own business, do your job, keep your head down, watch sports, and or some other things, and so we're not really trained to get involved in this. So there's all sorts of conditioning that's been going on. But it's also scary in many different levels. If you look at one piece of this, that one event, it's connected to so many core beliefs, core values, and so it's a very scary thing. And then, the other question is what we get out of it. Usually people like to hear things that make them feel good about their side, or football fans are notorious for this, Penn State fans are last to acknowledge, problems that were out there. So it's, we gotta look at what is the upside, but we're very heavily conditioned and responsive to emotional threats. That's the way the brain is wired, to keep us safe, not to put us, to act against our own best interest. So that would be. Yeah, cognitive dissonance is where you have a belief that things are a certain way, and then something else comes along that is inconsistent with that belief, whether one's behavior, some other belief that comes up, and there's a disturbance when we're not consistent, that we like to be consistent, whether it's politically or any other way, and that our life makes sense, and that we're motivated internally to keep things a coherent worldview, because otherwise we risk looking silly, and we want our world to make sense. So when something comes up that doesn't fit this worldview, and this is many worldviews are encompassed here. The media, who owns it, who it serves, the government, and so on. That it's very hard to change that, to be open to ideas. There was a friend of mine who had years ago. I was presenting with some information, and he said, well, these folks are not architects or engineers. Now, if there were architects or engineers, that would be credible. And then today, or yesterday, he said, well, I'm busy cleaning the house, I can't come. So we protect ourselves from information that could be destabilizing. And, and in fairness, look, people, life is challenging, so I don't judge people that, that are scared, that, have a lot on their plate and just don't want to take it on. So is that?
Any questions for Robert? How do you break down cognitive dissonance? Because when of us who accepts these ideas encounters most everybody else, resistance is pretty tough. We don't know how to do that.
Yeah, well, some of this is going on. There is you guys can see it or not. I just got the local newspaper, and from Times Leader, and it says 9/11 question. And this is on page 3, big article. That is cognitive dissonance of, what does this mean? What does it mean that someone came and there's 200 people or so yesterday? This plants it. Now, I think if you're trying to change things, that it could also get too intimidating to feel like you have to get through to everyone, you have to get through right away. Then it's okay to accept that that process may take place over time, and that and to the videos are a great thing, emails, which is a very encouraging thing for the future, because I think most younger people get their news online as opposed to watching the 3 media that we were, those that are older. We just saw those 3 stations that were obviously corporate controlled, and that was what reality was. But now online you can watch these things, and as long as they keep the internet open, you're not going to have to carry the whole load, and you'll be able to spread it out. And there are also people coming forward that have credibility, that look attractive, that it's easier for people to say, well, this person makes sense, and if they believe it, they obviously, have done well in life, like David Ray Griffin and so on, and that, that's easier for them to do it individually. We don't necessarily have the credibility. This is too big of a thing just to say, well, this is what I believe, and they'll say, well, Mike or Joe is a nice, sensible person, so therefore I'll turn my whole world upside down based on that one thing. But the science, as you saw today, the exposure to the information, it changes it. But when they don't have the information, which is kind of what's happened, then it's very hard to form, it's very hard to deal with when it's blocked out, which is what happens when someone doesn't want to discuss something, media or government.
Other questions for Robert?
Is there a reason?
Loud.
Is there a reason that some people are more susceptible of getting this information and saying, "Wow, it looks like we've been lied to," and why others, and I understand cognitive dissonance, but is there something in the brain that makes
repeat the question, Robert?
Yeah, is there something about some people that make it harder than others to get through? And that's certainly true. For a variety of reasons. Everyone is an individual. All of us have had different life experiences, family experiences, genetics, and everything. So people are different. Often it's culture, family values, ways of looking at things, and others that it's more threatening for whatever reasons. And sometimes people are just busy. They've got a lot on their plate, a lot that, it's hard. Life is difficult, and I think when life got harder for many people the last few years, they didn't need more problems. So I think people that can be extremely strong and sensible and have extremely good judgment and realize this is a hot potato, and I do not want to upend my life, and so the smart part of me is not going to get involved in this. I don't want to know. And that's not necessarily an irrational thing for an individual. But there's also, there's many kinds of reasons. So lots, and this is something that I think as time goes on, we'll get better at studying it. But there really aren't people studying it. We have maybe a war college. I don't think we have false flag courses or things where, or how to deal with this. So we've been subject to generations of stories that this would all change too much of the narrative, too much of the story. It's just too hard for many people.
How the limbic brain takes over.
Yeah, that our limbic system is really, we tend to think we're reasonable and logical and want to present ourselves to the world as that way, and that can be largely true, but largely not true. That our limbic system overwhelms us. The patterns that we were raised on and that we interact with others and the emotions we call it hijacking the prefrontal cortex, this front part of the brain, just gets overwhelmed. Now that can happen when you're embarrassed, when it doesn't make any sense, when you're fearful of getting shamed because of 9/11. It can, phobias, different types of anything that's emotional has a very strong power to it. And that part of the brain is very, very powerful. Look at all the advertising. They don't make logical cases. They make cases of you'll be popular, you'll have a relationship if you have this car, or you won't be loved. And it taps into basic functioning. So that keeps us alive. So that's what our genetics and so on, and supposedly our brain has not changed for 20,000 years, which is pretty amazing. When you imagine what life was back there was like, and so keeping us safe is a high priority, that you want to be safe. And so the part of the brain, it actually influences how you perceive something too, before you're actually aware that you're thinking about it, which is really interesting. A very quick response, that you're realizing this is good or bad before you even are aware you're thinking about it.
Like physicists who you ask, how did building 7 come down in free fall? And they'll make statements like, well, how could it come down any other way? Physicists, I'm talking about. They make up stuff to justify their worldview.
Yeah, now the other thing to think about, I was thinking about this just over the weekend, and that we're all afraid, we all want acceptance, we all want to be loved, we all want to belong, and this is one of the stronger needs, and we're very hardwired for these needs, and this is important, so that you go to school, you get a job, you're respected and trusted, and this is very important, to be trusted, to be cared about. But with Richard, I was thinking that if there's still history books as we go forward, and not just other forms of news online, that Richard is who is a historical figure, really. If you look at 9/11 being a fundamental, seminal event of humanity, somebody, history will report that somebody came along and started, and rallied the architects and engineers. And that'll be, and Richard will, is, in my opinion, a historical figure at this point. So if you look at your grandchildren, if you look at that, would you want to be seen as someone who was able to, embrace the truth and face the truth? And you don't have to, sacrifice yourself, perhaps, to get the truth out. You can do it gently, sending links and say, oh, isn't this curious, and such. But you'll be proud, someday, your grandchildren or whatever, because everything works out, which is the other part, is that, is that we also need a hopeful future. So that's the other part. It's not just looking at the dark side, but looking at a good side that allows us to make this a little safer to bite off.
Thank you. Any final questions for Robert back here?
Have you ever worked with people
Stand up, please, belt it out, we can't hear you.
Have you ever worked with people related to 9/11 that thought that maybe they had seen something to do with 9/11 or came in contact with people, but time has gone by and they just can't remember, like some type of regression? Work with people like that? And one question, and two, where can you be reached?
Oh, okay. Call Steve Corbett. Yeah, well, I'm in the phone book. I'm in 44. The part about 9/11, I think there is a need probably for society as we go along. People are going to have to process this, and it's a fundamental change in how we look at the world. So I think therapists, psychologists, social psychologists, and I taught social psychology, are going to have to come up with ways for people to be able to process this. The family members themselves, many of them, one of the more powerful things is being close enough to New York to go in to see firefighters and people whose lives who were dying, and some of them are now no longer living, that they spoke out. So I think there's so many different hooks to this that keep us inhibited, but they're realizing that the people that were affected, that we're not being disloyal to people that were affected in their families, and that's often how it feels, that we're socialized to rally around the troops, rally, around the victim status of folks. And so I think that'll be a whole nother line of work, actually, when that comes about. But there isn't really people doing the research as far as I can tell.
Anything else for Robert? Right over here.
Yeah, the people that perpetrated this act, act of, it's a totally monstrous act, right? Do you think they were trying to numb us or something?
Oh, I think that's already been, that's obviously been done for decades, for generations of having us distracted and numbed out through, distractions, sports, sexuality, alcohol, drugs, and just hold them mind their own business. But if you look at, not empowering, if you look at the local media, they may not have had the courage to take this on, and so you've got to kind of see that the media, this is too scary for even them, and that we tend to parentalize the media and think that, boy, they would handle this, but that's not what they're trained to do, especially local television, newspapers are not trained to take on these national issues, and so they become part of the denial system. And and part of the ridicule, which is a serious deal. So I want to validate that ridicule and shame is a very powerful controlling thing. It's not a minor, it's not like just for sissies get intimidated by being they're afraid to say things. It's very important. It's very powerful. Very powerful.
This is for Mr. Gage. I'm Bonnie Strasser, and I always thought that when I first saw some doubt coming out from various engineering people, when I saw those two towers fall in their footprint, I couldn't hardly believe that the planes had done this. But I had three children in New York. One of them was flying out of Newark on an American plane. At the time, the other one was the one that did go. He was a captain on American, so that was scary. The other one worked very close down there in Manhattan. But what I'm fascinated, Mr. Gage, is about Building 7. I just think it's fascinating, all the things that were there in that building, and it fell down in its footprint. And I'd like to know first, were there people lost in that building, or did the government have everybody out?
They did evacuate the building after the plane hit the tower. And
Okay,
theoretically, no one was.
So what was the time arrangement of the 3 buildings? When did Building 7 go? After the twins?
Let me release Robert to his chair. First of all, you don't have to stand here. You can hear some really incredible, concise statements from Robert on the DVD, 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out, along with 9 other psychologists, each of whom has a great angle on these issues that we're talking about. So, in the morning, 8:46, we have the plane hitting the North Tower. 15 minutes later, the plane hits the South Tower. 45 minutes later, the South Tower goes down. 15 minutes later, the North Tower goes down. 7 hours after that, Building 7 goes down. That help? Okay, great.
Yes, my name is Kevin. 2 questions for you, sir, and I appreciate you coming here today. It was a great showing of your knowledge. Number one is, it would seem to me that it would be very easy for a detective of any type of skills to follow the put and sell calls on the stock market to find out who financially gained by this.
Oh, there's people who did that, too.
But they haven't named the people who have made all the money.
They have.
Oh, they have, okay.
Not officials.
Not officially, okay.
But
Because I thought that would be pretty interesting to get that in the newspaper. Also...
Oh, excuse me. I was thinking put options. You said cell phone calls very clearly.
Oh, I did. I meant put. I said sells and puts.
Oh, cell phone. Okay. I heard cell phone too.
No, I was mistaken for this.
We're on same.
Okay. I was just wondering why that couldn't be exposed a little better. And number 2 is...
And it was. People have written books on this subject.
Why were these people brought in and interrogated?
Great question. What happened to our judicial system? There's been several court cases brought, and they're all funneled, almost all the 9/11 cases, to Judge Hellerstein, who dismisses most of the lawsuits, the worthy lawsuits. Many others get shut down in court. We appear to have a problem that is more, that is larger than we have ever imagined. It appears that not only do they, whoever they are, own Congress, probably because they pay for it very well, and we can't get any of them to take action. We've given our petition to them when we have 1,000 architects, 2,000 architects. We've given our DVDs to them. We've spoken with 3 dozen of them. Many in the 9/11 treatment have discussed this locally with their elected representatives. We just can't seem to get anywhere legislative, executive, or judicial. And I mean judicial seems to be sewn up. And I don't know how they do this. There are experts on this subject. The media, I'm just going to rant here for just a second and come back to you. It is not reporting the evidence about 9/11, with few exceptions. Why? Well, it turns out that 90% of it is controlled by just 6 corporations. Okay, well, who owns those corporations? Who controls them? Turns out to be the same people who control companies in corporations in the arms industry, the oil industry, the banking industry, the insurance industry, all of whom profited enormously from 9/11 and have historically profited enormously from things like 9/11 started, i.e. the wars, etc.
Also, I would assume that you would have to have a large crew of highly skilled technicians necessary to make this happen.
Yeah.
How do you speculate on anything that who they could be, or how
Why would I want to
people
do that?
quiet all of these years?
No,
you need a team of really highly skilled people for months to pull something like this
Oh,
off.
you really do. And there are those that can do it. I'll name a few of them, but I don't know that they did it. I think all of the controlled demolition companies should be investigated. Who's going to do it? Well, we don't know that nobody's come forth and saying, hey, I feel really bad. I just mass murdered 3,000 people. They might have come forth and said something similar to that. We don't know that they've come forward. A lot of people have come forward as whistleblowers, and they can't get any attention from the mainstream media. Just like we can. We don't know if they're still alive. I mean, one of the things they do is help people commit suicide who are whistleblowers. This is common practice. Jerry.
Yeah, hi Richard. Thanks for coming. I'm a believer. I was at ground zero on 9/11. I want to play devil's advocate. Building 7 goes down because of office fires. I would think architects and engineers would be incredibly concerned about that because it's never happened ever before. So if they can't accept the evidence you're presenting, that it fell free fall, why aren't they concerned? Because I would think every high-rise, every steel, high-rise building would be in jeopardy of collapsing because of office fires. So what is their answer to that, or how do they address that question?
Most architects and engineers know nothing about the third worst structural failure in modern history. That's Building 7. So first of all, they don't even know that it went down because the AIA didn't even tell them. They simply issued a report without distributing it to all the architects and engineers about it. There was a lot more publicity about Building 7, excuse me, Twin Towers. Second of all, there was recommendations made by NIST that suggested structural changes were necessary in high-rise buildings as a result of these problems. But they were never implemented into the International Building Code. We have exiting improvements, fireproofing improvements, but no structural improvements. No improvements that would keep a skyscraper from falling at free fall acceleration straight down through the path of greatest resistance. We don't have that. So the reason they're not asking about it, they don't know about it. It's pretty sad. They should be demanding some real answers. Yes?
It gets confusing with Michael Moore. He does Fahrenheit 9/11, right? So how do I don't pay attention to that guy, so I didn't watch it. But apparently, he's saying that it wasn't really, a terrorist attack, right? So how does your argument compare with his argument?
Well, he wants an investigation of Building 7, Michael Moore. So that's good. But he's just not sticking his neck out like a whole lot of other people aren't. I think, does anybody have his phone number? we'll advertise that as well. Next question.
Yeah, Richard, if no one has any other questions, I have one final question. Being involved in construction and actually working in New York City in the past, the fire systems are actually made, especially in high-rises, that they don't require any power, anything. They're actually gravity fed at certain points, like the towers were. And there's clear indications that certain floors, the fire systems actually tripped. And what a lot of people don't understand is when you trip one point on a fire system, the whole floor gets flooded. So the whole temperature thing. The other thing that always amazed me is building steel tends to be steel that, as you know as an architect, is ductile, especially skyscrapers, that they can move and bend in the wind. They're actually designed to do that. What fascinates me is that when you see it implode, you're seeing tremendous shear events. In other words, a tremendous amount of energy at very localized points, shearing the steel, especially the stainless steel on the outside.
Well, the stainless steel is not structural, and it's aluminum on the outside.
Aluminum, but I mean, the steel column on the outside, the pieces are actually shearing bends. They're not bends, they shear, and that takes a tremendous amount more force.
Well, I don't think the perimeter structures on the Twin Towers were sheared. We don't see angled cuts on the perimeter structures, very many, but we did see actually angled cuts by the iron workers, so we don't use that as evidence. And the pile does not show a whole bunch of perimeter structures still cut at angles with cutter charges. In fact, we don't see that many core columns cut that way either. The core columns appear to be, for the record, having suffered a concussive blast, because they're deeply reddened and oxidized, but not melted, the core columns. But they appear to have a concave long side at the end and a convex long side at the other end, indicating massive force laterally. But I didn't get your question.
Well, the thing is the fact that even if it wasn't 100%, the fact that there's water being dispersed with lower temperature and thermal energy in the building, and would go counter to the argument that just a standard office fire would generate enough heat to simultaneously cause failure of all your steel support structures.
Yeah, I am in agreement, but there was plenty of floors. Half of Building 7 was not activated because of problems when the towers went down. It damaged the sprinkler system. Plus, somebody turned the whole Building 7 onto test mode before 9/11, like that morning, and forgot to turn it back.
Convenient.
Yeah, that's actually documented, but I don't have it documented.
What does that mean,
Test mode, it means it doesn't work. You're testing it, so it's offline. Turn the sprinklers off. Yes?
Looking at the big picture of what's going on in the world and all these conspiracies that people tend to blow off, they're not conspiracies, they're evil people that have conspired against the human race. And basically, if you research these conspiracies, they're all dots that connect. We could go back to Lusitania. We could go to World War I, World War II, Pearl Harbor, Korea, the trade towers, they all connect. And they're all devised and orchestrated by a lot of alphabet gangs that belong to the UN. UN, if you're familiar with Agenda 21, wants to supersede our Constitution. These people are evil. I'd encourage people to look up the Franklin incident, Boys Town. They were taking children and they were flying them down to Washington, D.C., and they were using them as pedophile rings. These people are evil bastards.
With that happy note, you realize what we're up against. And so Jack Harris has composed a song to end our day together. Let's introduce Jack Harris.
First, I would like to thank Mr. Gage and encourage him to continue. He's trying to take his message to the world. I'm trying to take this message to the world. This song is America and Peace. I wrote it in 2007, the year I published my book on page 53, Beyond My Wildest Dreams. But America and Peace, there is, obviously from this presentation you can see that there is cancer in America. Now there's actually cancer in me, but this presentation shows how high the cancer is in the government of the United States, the land of the free. America and peace. God has blessed America, and I believe He always will, as long as we stand with justice on top of every hill. Our soldiers are the best of us. They stand at freedom's right. Honor is their cornerstone, the law's their guiding light. The insanity of war is nearly at its end. I believe the world will find a way for all men to be friends. God has blessed America, and I believe He always will, as long as we stand with justice on top of every hill. We ask for understanding, not a military fight. We ask all men to do what all men know is right. Our world is but a cinder orbiting in space. All men should understand this is our only place. God has blessed America, and I believe He always will, as long as we stand with justice on top of every hill. A mother's tears are all the same when the soldiers fall. If they will cry together, the world will heed their call. When all men understand this song, I'll know it shows the way to honor justice, peace on earth, and all men's better day. God bless the world with peace, and America my home. God, please bless the world with peace, and America my home. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Gage.
Thank you, Jack. Thanks, everybody. We can talk more offline.